We're taking our time and we're checking the time. 20:05 ist das an einem Mittwochabend, 13. Mai 2015. Und du bist eingetuned to Radio Emergency hier in the Amok, Alex and Frank Stoner Show. What's going on, everybody? Schön, dass ihr an Bord seid. And we're ready to kick it out big time heute, denn wir sind heute mit ganz special guest aus Amerika wieder. Sogar in der Bundesstadt, wo meine Schwester und mein Schwager wohnen, Frankie. Hey, schön, dass du auch dabei bist.
Ja, schönen guten Abend, Alex hier. Und schönen Gruß auch an die Hörer, dass ihr heute Abend dabei seid. Ist cool, weil heute ist wirklich eine besondere Sendung. Wir haben echt einen Gast und ich muss gestehen, Alex, ich bin ein bisschen aufgeregt.
Ja, ich auch.
Ich bin ein bisschen aufgeregt. Wir machen jetzt auch schon eine ganze Weile Radio und man ist da schon cool und hat so seine Routine auch irgendwo. Aber heute, ich meine, das ist ein besonderer Gast, den wir hier bekommen. Ne?
Ja.
Und das ist wirklich auch eine Ehre, dass wir mit dem sprechen können. Und
alle
so,
Gäste, die wir haben, sind besonders, weil die kommen von alle Ecken von dieser Welt und jeder hat mal eine Meinung mal zu äußern. Und ganz besonders an unser Gast heute, Ross Hamilton, für die diesen Namen nicht kennen, Frank, der hat gesagt, der ist keine ausgebildete Archäologe, der ist eigentlich in Liberal Arts hat er studiert, aber der kam dazu durch seine Bücher, dass er geschrieben hat und so mal in Verbindung mit verschiedenen archäologischen Organisationen in USA mal so zusammengestoßen, weil der hat den natürlich erwähnt über die Forschungen, dass die machen und so weiter. No? So ziemlich interessant. Und also, was der alles so uns erzählen wird, der ist ziemlich, wie sagt man, der hat Ahnung von sehr, sehr viele Sachen. Ne? Das spirituell. Ne?
Ja, das ist wirklich genau richtig. Also ich habe jetzt in der letzten Zeit natürlich auch mich viel mit Ross Hamilton beschäftigt, damit ich hier auch gut vorbereitet in dieses Interview heute Abend gehe. Mhm. Und ist echt ein interessanter Mann. Ich meine, echt schon eine interessante Biografie. Als junger Mann ist er lange Zeit in Indien gewesen. Ja. Ich bin auch alter Indienfahrer, finde ich gleich mal cool. Und dort hat er wohl einen Guru gehabt, der ihm auch Initiationen gegeben hat in Yoga, Meditationstechniken und so. Und hat also viel an seinem Bewusstsein gearbeitet und ist dann eben zurück nach Amerika und mit einem neuen Blick an die Dinge rangegangen. Und er kann uns ganz viel erzählen. Ich meine, er ist ein Kenner von der präkolumbianischen Geschichte Amerikas. Also alles, was vor Kolumbus ablief. Ja. Alles, was zusammenhängt mit den Ureinwohnern von Amerika. Die wir manchmal Indianer nennen, aber es ist dann noch viel vielschichtiger. Ureinwohner, da kommen wir dann auch zu den Riesen. Ja, die in Amerika gelebt haben sollen, sage ich jetzt mal noch vorsichtig. Wir werden ihn dann nachher wirklich darüber fragen, dazu ansprechen. Und er hat einfach ein unglaublich breit gefächertes Wissen. Er kennt sich aus mit den megalithischen Bauwerken, die in Amerika gefunden werden. Ja. Die auch viel mehr sind, als wir das überhaupt ahnen. Ne? Ich meine, uns hat man ja immer so erzählt, letzten Endes, als Kolumbus dort angekommen ist, da waren da nur Wilde. Wilde, die irgendwie so in Stammeskulturen da so gelebt haben und keinerlei Zivilisation haben. Und wir werden heute Abend erfahren, also wenn ihr es noch nicht wisst, das ist falsch. Also da gab es schon Zivilisation, es gab Städte dort, es gab Entwicklungen dort und man weiß so wenig drüber, wie viel dort auch von dieser Wissenschaft unterdrückt wurde. Schon seit geraumer Zeit und auch aktuell. Es ist immer noch verbotene Archäologie. Was heißt verboten? Unterdrückte Archäologie.
Ja. Da hat er erwähnt, dass zum Beispiel unter anderem Dinge ist, dass was gefunden worden sind. Es wird von gewisse Organisationen tatsächlich zurückgehalten, sodass das man nicht an die Öffentlichkeit kommt irgendwie.
Ja, total spannend. Darüber werden wir auf jeden Fall mit ihm sprechen, auch warum das ist. Ich meine, warum muss man jetzt eigentlich Artefakte aus der Vorgeschichte, warum sollte man die überhaupt unterdrücken? Ich meine, was hat das für eine Relevanz heute? Da können wir einfach sagen, guck, haben wir gefunden, ist doch cool. Darüber werden wir mit ihm sprechen und natürlich auch über den Serpent Mound. Mhm. Ja, da hat er ein eigenes Buch drüber geschrieben. Das haben wir auch hier auf Facebook im Ankündiger reingepostet. Das ist auch wirklich spannend. Ich meine, den Serpent Mound ist schon bekannt, oder? Es ist so ein schlangenartiger Erdwall. Die
in Bundesstaat Ohio ist.
In Ohio. Und das ist wirklich krass, was
ich glaube, 1500 Meter lang ist das Ding oder sowas, oder 1500 Fuß. Sowas, ne, weil 1000 Fuß, 1200 Fuß ist ein Mile. Ja, das fucking Ding ist groß.
Das ist auf jeden Fall groß.
Ja, das ist größer als 1 Kilometer lang.
Kannst du eigentlich auch nur aus der Luft sehen. Also wenn du dort so entlangläufst, siehst du da nur halt, dass das
Hügeln und sowas,
genau so ein Wall ist. Ja. Und diese Städte, dieser Serpent Mound, das ist auch wirklich hochgradig spannend. Also, das hatte ich so auch nicht auf dem Schirm. Aber Ross Hamilton hat da einiges dazu zu sagen und dieser Serpent Mound, mittlerweile bin ich da überzeugt davon, das ist eine der ganz wichtigen archäologischen Stätten auf der ganzen Erde. Ja. Das ist wirklich ein ganz, ganz abgefahrenes Teil. So,
well, das hat der hat das erwähnt, habe ich mal mitgekriegt, was sehr, sehr interessant ist, dass die haben ein Sternbild auf dieses Serpent Mound gelegt.
Ja. Lass uns da noch nicht zu viel hervorgreifen. Das sind echt genau die Knüller, die wir dann nachher hier direkt aus seinem Munde hören wollen.
Okay.
Wir werden ihn ab circa 21 Uhr, wenn wir ihn hier live am Start haben.
Genau, direkt aus Ohio, via Skype. Und der wird uns mal viel erzählen, weil der kennt sich auch mal, ich habe mal auch das mal mitgekriegt, der kennt sich auch aus sehr, sehr gut mit die ganze Rothschild-Geschichten und sowas. Ne? Der kennt sich mal tatsächlich damit aus. Ne?
Der kennt sich in ganz vielen Dingen aus. Er ist wirklich auch eine Koryphäe auf diesem Gebiet. Ja. Also der ist ein gefragter Mann bei Kongressen, alternative Geschichte, dort ist er als Redner unterwegs und aber wirklich ein gefragter Mann und deswegen finde ich es richtig cool, dass er da uns zugesagt hat und heute Abend hier erstmals in Deutschland im Radio live seine Arbeiten präsentiert. Und das sind Dinge, da wissen in Deutschland die allerwenigsten Leute darüber Bescheid. Und
wenn überhaupt jemand,
wir sollten das hören, ja.
Ja, aber bevor wir dazu kommen, wir haben mal noch mal ein bisschen Zeit und natürlich sage ich mal von meiner Seite ist das, was sagt ihr zu das Wetter? Ist doch geil, oder? Der Sommer ist auf dem Weg, Mann. Auf jeden Fall hier in Camptown, wir haben mal blauer Himmel. Es war ein bisschen cooler heute, aber schön warm vorgestern Sonnenschein und so weiter und so fort. Und das ist genau mein Ding.
Oh ja.
Genau mein Ding, ne? Und ich freue mich und ich hoffe mal, dass deine Fleckchen Erde, dass auch das Wetter eigene Massen mitmacht und so weiter und keine Tornados oder sowas mal durch die Gegend fliegt oder sowas mal.
So wie letzte Woche.
Ja, ganz krass, ne? Ja, und ich würde mal einfach mal vorschlagen, dass wir werfen mal eine kurze Blick mal an die Nachrichten, was mal alles so abgegangen ist in der letzten Zeit und das sind ein paar interessanten Themen, die ich zum Beispiel habe. Unter anderem in Deutschland geht das Gas aus, ja? Ja.
Das Gas geht aus.
Das Gas geht aus.
Wie gut, dass der Sommer jetzt anfängt.
Ja, aber
das wäre echt richtig schockierend.
Das geht darum, das wieder auf den Tab zu bringen. Das wird darüber geredet, über ein Milliardenprojekt schon wieder. Ne?
Aha.
Milliardenprojekt ist notwendig, um Deutschland mit Gas wieder zu versorgen.
Weil wir das Gas von den bösen Russen nicht kaufen dürfen. Ja, das ist ja das böse Gas. Ja. Nein, bauen wir lieber eine neue Pipeline. Was ist da angeplant? Wo soll es dann herkommen? Legen wir eine Pipeline unterm Atlantik und wollen uns ein bisschen Fracking-Gas.
Wollen wir mal gleich damit anfangen?
Ja klar,
okay, so, ich habe das jetzt mal gerade abgerufen. Ich muss mal kurz mal hier warten. So, da sind wir so bald soweit. Es steht hier, dass die Gasförderungen in Deutschland werden immer weniger und doch, das ist noch lange alles. Die Niederländer drosseln ab 2020 ihre Lieferungen dramatisch. Und da sind wir mal schon wieder, wo die mehrere Milliarden in die Ukraine zum Ölforderung machen, weil da Krieg ist jetzt im Moment. Die Niederländer können das nicht machen. So natürlich Königin Beatrice und ihr Vater, der dreht sich mal im Graben und so ein Scheiß, aber das ist nichts Neues mittlerweile. Nun muss sich Deutschland mal andere Wege suchen, mal um an Gas zu kommen. Mal eine Maßnahme ist, Endgeräte zu sanieren und zu modernisieren und dabei gleichzeitig mal neue Standards zu setzen, wie wahre Mammutaufgabe. Eine wahre Mammutaufgabe, so wie man das hier sagt, ja. Momentan werden Monteure geschult, die diese Gasthermen umbauen sollen. Und die Kosten pro Gerät beläuft sich mal auf rund 250 Euro. Insgesamt rechnet man mit den Ausgaben von 1 Milliarden höher. Mhm. So, jetzt, ich frage mich, ist das, was wollen die mit diesen Gasturbinen jetzt machen? Wo soll das mal montiert werden? Soll das mal irgendwie so illegal angezapft werden irgendwo?
Vor allem ist ja die Frage, wo das Gas herkommt.
Ja, das ist, was ich meine.
Bei uns findet man da keins.
Ja, so, deswegen frage ich mich mal, was die mal hier planen an Tun. Aber was soll ich mal dazu sagen? Auf jeden Fall, wir müssen mal irgendwas machen. Und das ist mal der Punkt, ist, dass wenn das Gas bei uns mal ausgeht, vielleicht, wobei Putin, als der mal mit Merkel getroffen hat, der sieht Deutschland als eine Partner. Der Putin hat gesagt. Ne?
Ja, hat er gesagt, ja. Er sieht, interessant, ja.
Ja, der sieht Der ist gar nicht böse gegen die Deutschen.
Ich meine, letzten Endes wird der Putin oder in Russland, die schlauen Köpfe werden das ja auch verstehen, wie das gerade geostrategisch abläuft.
Denke schon,
so hier, was wir gehört haben, George Friedman und so weiter.
Ja, klar.
Wer ist souverän und das werden die auch wissen, denke ich.
Keine Ahnung.
Aber letztes Trauen kann man ihnen auch nicht, das ist umgekehrt. Wir müssen auch mal vorsichtig sein, so dem Putin trauen tue ich natürlich auch nicht. Ist auch ein Gerissener.
Ja,
Staatsmann und so.
welche Politiker traut man heutzutage?
Aber eben, ganz genau. Also wirklich trauen, wenn du mich so fragst, tue ich da überhaupt keinen mehr.
Aber was ziemlich geil ist, sage ich mal von meiner Seite, und dann, ich muss mal sagen, ist, dass ich weiß jetzt nicht mal, ob eine Waffe tatsächlich notwendig wäre, um mich für so eine Forderung mal zu stellen. Aber in Südafrika es gibt zunehmende Varianten von Überfallen auf Männer, die jetzt zurzeit registriert werden.
In Südafrika?
Ja. Und das
Überfall auf Männer, naja.
Ja, jetzt check this out, man. Eine Frauentrio, die in einer BMW rumgekarrt haben einen 33-jährigen Mann auf der Straße nach dem Weg gefragt. So, dann wurde er mit Waffengewalt in ihr Auto gezwungen.
Oh.
Wow. Im Fahrzeug begannen die Frauen mit Streicheleien, um den Mann zur Ejakulation zu bringen.
Come on.
Steht hier. Und aus Angst habe anfangs bei ihm mal der Manneskraft versagt. Also wenn jemand mir mal eine Waffe zum Kopf halten würde, jetzt kommst du von mir. Also du musst mal schon eine Quentin Tarantino sein, so dass das funktioniert.
Es gibt Männer, die stehen drauf, aber aber es werden nicht die meisten sein. So den kalten Stahl an der Schläfe und so.
Ja, aber
schon was Erotisches, oder?
Ja, aber deswegen sage ich mal, bei mir brauchst du mal keine Waffe. Die einzige Grund, warum eine Waffe ist, wenn die Frauen tatsächlich hässlich aussehen. You know? Aber ich muss mal andererseits sagen.
Ja, aber was wollten die denn eigentlich von denen?
Naja, pass auf.
Letztes Mal.
Pass auf. Also, nun zwangen mal die Frauen ihn einen Flüssigkeit einzunehmen, die bei ihm zu mehrmaliger Erektionen führten, so quasi eine Viagra flüssige Viagra. Ne? In einige Plastiktüten wurde danach mal die Samenportionen des Mannes mal abgefüllt und in eine mobile Coolbox verstaut. Na? Traumatisiert setzen sie die Trio mal diesen Mann dann auf den freien Fuß und vermutet wird, dass der männliches Geschlechtsteller und Samen für eine sogenannte Multimedizin eingesetzt werden.
Multimedizin? Was ist das?
I have no fucking
idea. Das ist
idea.
so eine Voodoo-Geschichte oder sowas, ja?
I have no idea.
Doch, das ist gar nicht schon. Ja, come on, ich meine, das ist bestimmt irgend so ein Voodoo-Gebräu und so, weißt du, irgendein Schadenszauber oder Liebeszauber oder so, und da brauchst du halt vielleicht auch solche Zutaten dazu.
I have no idea.
Aber wieso muss man da jemanden mit Waffengewalt zwingen? Ich meine, come on, ne? Also es gibt doch auch einfache Möglichkeiten, oder? Für 3 Frauen sowas zu arrangieren. Muss man sich ja nicht gleich strafbar machen. Das ist doch Wahnsinn.
Aber
wie viele Dinge mehr herziehst, Alex?
Frank, was soll ich dir sagen? Ich fand das pretty cool. Ich muss nur von meiner Seite sagen, dass ich, käme das mal mir mehr entgegen, die müssen keine Waffen benutzen, ne? Weil, hier, ich muss mal auch andererseits sagen, weißt du, ich habe mal niemals mal eine 10 gepoppt. Weißt du, was ich meine bei einer 10? Eine Frau eine Dings von 1 bis 10, ne, die geilste Frauen sind. Ich habe noch nie eine 10 gehabt. Aber ich habe mal einmal 5 Zweier gehabt. Aber das ist genau das Gleiche, oder?
Du siehst mich schamhaft erröten, Alex.
Naja, auf jeden Fall, Frankie, das ist das eine. Noch eine erschreckende Nachricht, und das sollte man hier jetzt eigentlich für alle deutsche Bürger mal und auch nicht deutsche Bürger, die mal die sozialmedizinische Sachen hier in Deutschland in Anspruch nehmen. Im Jahr 2014 wurden mal mit 45 neu eingeführten Wirkstoffen so viele neue Medikamenten zugelassen wie nie zuvor. Und trotz der 2010 eingeführten Preisverhandlungen der Krankenkassen mit den Pharmaunternehmen stellen die neuen Mittel gleichzeitig Negativrekorde beim Preis auf. Es heißt, dass die Preise für Medikamente in Deutschland sind jetzt so hoch wie noch nie. Und das bedeutet, dass gleich 8 der neuen Wirkstoffe schlagen pro Packung mit mehr als 10.000 Euro zu Buche, Alter.
Pro Packung?
Pro Packung, das musst du mal fucking, das ist wie
Multimedizin, sag ich dir.
Frank, das ist so, guck mal, meine Mutter, sie ist Diabetikerin, ne? Sie wird 75 dieses Jahr. Und als ich mal allein dieses Insulin mit ihr geholt habe, für eine 3 Monate Portion von Insulin hat über $700 gekostet.
Echt, Hammer.
You know, und das musst du mal vorstellen. Dass die, und wir haben mal gerade, wenn haben wir als letztes über Bayer gesprochen? Ich glaube, das war in unser Gespräch gestern, als wir mal mit Robin und Danny unterwegs waren. Na, das, Bayer, ihr habt das mal wahrscheinlich das auf die Frank Stoner und Amok Alex Show Seite gesehen. Das Bayer steht dazu, dass die Bienen verschwinden. Na?
Mit ihren Pestiziden, ja.
Ja, mit den Pestiziden. Und da war sogar ein Spruch, ist das, ja, das tut auch die Biergärtner, die stehen dazu, weil je weniger Bienen auf die Biergärten kommen, dann je mehr Gäste sitzen da und genießen ihr Bier. Aber ich frage mich, wo ist der fucking Logik? Eine Biene stört dich doch gar nicht.
Ah, das ist einfach nur dumm, oder?
Eine Wespe kann ich
keine
mal
Bienen,
verstehen.
irgendwann keine Hopfenblüten mehr, oder? Wer bestäubt die Hopfenblüten? Die brauchst du auch.
Naja,
Sauinsekten
da
dran,
kommt
ja.
Monsanto und Bayer und alle diese Organisationen, die kümmern sich denn darüber. Ne?
Aber weißt du, ich will jetzt mal, erlaub mir mal so eine zynische Bemerkung hier. Preise für Medikamente so hoch wie nie, ist ja eigentlich eine gute Nachricht, weil dann nehmen die Leute weniger von dem Zeug, ja. Je weniger von dem Zeug genommen wird, desto besser ist es auch, ja. Pharmaindustrie.
Naja, das Problem ist dass
ich weiß,
die Leute würden mental dazu.
Es gibt natürlich Leute, die sind von gewissen Medikamenten auch abhängig und die kannst du dann auch echt hart treffen, ja. Das ist nicht in Ordnung, ja.
Na, pass auf, hier. Das ist eine Medikament, die Sovaldi genannt ist, ne? Das ist gegen Hepatitis C, ne? Und pro Behandlungsfall kostet das bis zu 120.000 Euro.
Das ist ja auch echt. Also da bin ich mir aber sicher, ganz ehrlich, Alex, da wird's bessere Methoden geben. Ja.
Ich würde mal hoffen. Ich meine, das ist mal, allein das ist hier der Grund, zum Naturheilung zu gehen. Na? Und wir haben das mal teilweise, guck mal, mit Marihuana und Cannabis-Extrakten funktioniert das. Und das ist ein Naturprodukt. Na? Und das kannst du mal in deine eigene Garten teilweise wachsen lassen. Oder du kannst das mal per Prescription oder sowas, beziehungsweise Rezept mittlerweile holen. Und da bezahlst du keine 100, das muss mal so ein fucking Kick-Ass-Grass sein für 120.000 Euro pro
Packung. Da kommt auch auf die Packungsgröße drauf an. Das kann man natürlich auch mal sagen. Die Packungsgröße eine Palette ist oder so.
Nein, nicht, dass sie da sagen 120 Euro pro Kopf, ne? Ja, aber das ist schon heavy, ne? Das ist schon heavy, da kannst du mal sehen. Und Bayer ist bestimmt mal ein von den großen Industrien, die mal mit involviert sind, Frankie. Betcha, I betcha.
Ja, na sicher. Das hat ja auch Tradition in Deutschland, ne? Chemieproduktion. Bayer, wenn du da das weiterverfolgst, kommst du da bei IG Farben raus und dann wird's dann richtig düster, so, ja. Wenn du dann guckst, IG Farben, zur Zeit ein drittes Reich, was da alles abgelaufen ist, naja. Sie ist Bayer es bueno, hat's mal geheißen in Südamerika.
Naja, Frankie. Hast du irgendwas am Start?
Ja, ich habe auch, was mich erstmal richtig empört hat, als hier die vergangenen Tage, hast du das mit den Elefanten mitbekommen, ne? Überall in den Medien, in den Medien steht so, 65.000 Elefanten sind in Tansania in den letzten 5 Jahren gewildert worden, abgeschlachtet worden. Ja. 65.000, ja. Und das war ein ordentlicher Anteil auch von der Gesamtpopulation und die sind jetzt da wieder bedroht, ja. Und stand zu den Medien und helle Aufregung, ja. Und gleichzeitig kursieren im Internet dann Bilder von den Söhnen von Donald Trump. Donald Trump ist ja so ein Immobilienoligarch, so ein Superreicher.
Mogul. Da jeder, der mal in New York.
Ich sage jetzt immer Oligarch, weil ich meine, weißt du, finde ich irgendwie, bei den Russen nennt man es immer die Oligarchen und bei uns sagt man der Unternehmer.
Jeder, der in New York
oder Mogul ist mir egal.
Jeder, der in New York gewesen war, kennt die Trump Towers.
Ja, natürlich. Donald Trump, so ein Typ schon in den 80ern ist ja schon ganz groß geworden, also mit Immobilien halt extrem reich. Ja. Und wir reden ja echt von der Elite.
Ja,
also, ja.
Auf jeden Fall.
Und da tauchen jetzt Bilder auf so von seinen Söhnen, die da in Afrika so auf Großwildjagd unterwegs sind und die dann da neben den toten Tieren posieren. Unter anderem eben auch so ein Elefant, dem sie dann den Schwanz abschneiden und so dasteht, stolz, ich habe den Elefanten umgebracht und so. Also, denke ich mir, das ist doch, was sind das für Typen? Ist das krank oder ist das einfach nur verkommen oder so? Und ich rede jetzt nicht überhaupt gegen Jagd oder so, ja. Jagd zur Nahrungsmittelbeschaffung oder auch um gewisse Populationen von Tieren zu regeln. Okay, kann über alles sprechen, aber hier geht's um was ganz anderes, ja. Hier geht's doch darum, dass sich welche superreichen Leute ihren Kick holen. Ja, und die ihren Kick darin finden, ihren Spaß, also so ein bisschen so ein Gefühl ins Leben kriegen. Das kriegen die halt, wenn die so ein großes Tier töten, einen Elefanten oder Krokodil. Das ist einige gesehen haben, das Krokodil haben sie auch über so einen Baum aufgehängt. Also ich meine einfach, was sind das für Leute so? Was geht mit deren Kopf vor so? Ja. Und ich meine, das ist kein Einzelfall. Weißt du, was das Besondere daran ist? Dass diese Bilder aufgetaucht sind. Ja, da weiß man nämlich auch gar nicht warum. Ja, wie die an die Öffentlichkeit gekommen sind, ist ein amerikanischer Fernsehsender, der hat diese Bilder auf einmal gehabt. Denn da gibt's ganz viele solche Leute, die das machen, ja. Nur der Bilder bekommt nicht raus, ja.
Da gibt's noch so eine Frau, die immer mal auch im Facebook mal sich rumhosiert, mal ganz stolz, dass sie mal irgendwelche Löwen oder Löwinnen oder Jaguars mal gebeutet hat, mal in Afrika, wenn sie unterwegs ist. Das ist auch mal so eine Tussi.
Das ist ein Freizeitvergnügen für Superreiche. Ja. Wir haben es auch gehabt, das war doch, glaub, vor 1 oder 2 Jahren oder sowas. Da gab es in Spanien irgendwie Stress, irgendwelche Probleme. Ich weiß jetzt gar nicht mehr genau, was es war. Ja. Und wollte man, dass der König was sagt, aber der König war gar nicht da. Der König und seine Family, die waren auch in Afrika auf Großwildjagd, haben sie dann erzählt. Ups, das ist kurz mal rausgekommen. Ja. Normal, du siehst da keine Bilder, das wird nie darüber berichtet. Das ist kein Einzelfall. Ja, das ist einer von den Freizeitkicks, den sich so die Eliten geben. Ja. Ich will jetzt nicht sagen, dass alle 65.000 Elefanten in Tansania auf deren Konto gehen. Nee, das gibt natürlich auch Elfenbein, ja, ist weltweit begehrt. Es geht auch um China, Medizin und alles mögliche so. Ja. Aber ich finde echt, man muss sich das mal reinziehen, wie sich solche Leute ihren Kick holen. Ja. Wie erbärmlich sind, was sind denn das für Wichte?
Naja,
und das sind aber die Leute, die extrem einflussreich sind. Ja. Wir reden hier von der Trump-Family. Wir haben auch mal drüber berichtet, Alex, wenn du dich erinnerst, über die Geschichte mit dem Jeffrey Epstein. Weißt du das noch?
Ja, ja.
Da ging es um den Sexsklavenring, so,
genau,
so mit
wo
Minderjährigen.
Bill Clinton mehrere Mal auf seiner Insel gewesen war und
genau,
und
da ist halt Donald Trump direkt involviert in diese Geschichten. Ja. Und ich meine, das sind letzten Endes, also aus meiner Sicht, hängen diese Dinge miteinander zusammen. Das sind Leute, die finden in den einfachen, schönen Dingen im Leben, finden überhaupt keinen Kick mehr. Normaler Sex gibt keinen Kick mehr. Normal irgendwie Freude haben nach vielleicht einem erfüllten Tag, wo man sein Ding halt macht, das kennen die gar nicht mehr. Nee, um den Kick zu kriegen, um überhaupt ein bisschen was zu spüren im Leben, ja, musst du entweder Viecher umknallen, ja, oder hier diese wirklich krankhaften Sexualgeschichten, die da laufen. Da geht's gar nicht mehr so drum, irgendwie jetzt so ein Bedürfnis zu erfüllen, sondern da geht's nur noch darum, um Dominanz, nur noch Dominanz auszuüben über andere Lebewesen. Da geht's nur noch um Unterdrückung, dieses Niedermachen. Und das ist, ich will jetzt nicht grundsätzlich sagen, jeder Jäger hat damit zu tun. Wie gesagt, die Jagd an sich das ist nicht das, von was wir sprechen. Ja? Ja. Wir reden von den Leuten, die nur noch so ihren Kick bekommen. Ja? Ja. Und das sind geistige und spirituelle Wichte. Ja, aber diese Leute regieren diese Welt im Moment. Ja. Das sind so Clans, die da ganz oben mitspielen. Ja.
Naja, irgendwann kommt das mal zu
Kinder Trump.
Irgendwann kommt das mal dazu und das wirst du mal sehen. Da gab es mal einen Film darüber, das heißt Der Jagd. Ja, und das ist, wo reiche Leute nicht mehr ihre Kick von Tieren zu jagen kriegen, sondern Menschen. Irgendwelche Leute aus dem Gefängnis, dass die sagen, okay, lass ihn laufen.
So ist es.
Und dann gehe ich mal los und ich jag diese Typen und ich bring die um.
Alex, so ist es. Cool, dass du es ansprichst. Genau so ist es. Ich meine, das ist dann der nächste Schritt. Ja?
Ja.
Wenn du auch irgendwann da den Kick nicht mehr kriegst, dann musst du da nochmal irgendwie das Ganze erweitern. Ja? Und wer weiß, ob solche Sachen, also man hört von solchen Dingen, gibt's natürlich keine Beweise dafür.
Da gibt's Filme darüber,
Fotos, aber
da gibt's auch Filme aus dem Hollywood darüber, dass das sowas.
Aber wir wissen ja zum Beispiel, was wir wissen, ist, dass es all diese Snuff-Videos zum Beispiel gibt auf dieser Welt. Yeah. Diese Dinge werden gemacht, das sind Auftragsarbeiten, da zahlen Leute unglaublich viel Geld dafür für so Killersachen und sowas. Ja? Ja. Diese Dinge laufen. Und das geht in die gleiche Richtung. Ja, Leute holen sich da ihren Kick. Und das ist einfach so erbärmlich. Also das ist, zum einen ist es so verkommen und zum anderen tun die mir schon fast leid, weil ich mir denke, wow, ey, wie traurig musst du dich in deinem Inneren fühlen, so in deiner Innenwelt. Irgendwann ist auch für diese Leute, kommt auch der Moment, wo du auch mal für dich bist, wo du mal alleine bist, wo du im Bett liegst und dann einschlafen willst und ich meine, wie traurig ist das, was du da siehst? Boah, das kann ich mir gar nicht vorstellen, die tun mir irgendwie schon fast leid so. Also wenn du dich so in die Dunkelheit begeben hast, dass du diesen Lifestyle brauchst, und wie gesagt, die Grenze nach oben ist da offen. Ja.
Ja.
Ich will jetzt ja gar nicht auf das Thema heute eingehen, aber wir haben das ja auch schon mal behandelt, hier ritueller Missbrauch von Kindern, diese Geschichten. Die Grenze nach oben ist offen. Ja. Und diese Leute sind in gewisser Hinsicht fast zu bemitleiden. Ja. Aber das Tragische ist, und deswegen bringen wir das, ja, wir wollen ja jetzt nicht irgendwie eine Hexenjagd betreiben. Das Tragische ist, das sind die Eliten, die hier den Kurs bestimmen, wohin die Welt steuert. Ja. Das sind die Leute, die dann woanders, wenn die dann nicht gerade mal auf Großwildjagd sind oder auf hier Jeffrey Epsteins Sexinsel in der Karibik, ja, wenn die da dann sind die auf Konferenzen. Nee, der Jeffrey, der hat 10 Monate hat er gesessen. Ja.
Echt?
Ja. Das ist auch das Fiese, da haben wir doch drüber gesprochen hier. Jeffrey Epstein.
Also, ich dachte, die haben ihn eingebucht.
Nein, das ist wie es in Amerika so läuft. Die haben einen Deal gemacht damals. Ja. Der Jeffrey Epstein hat zugegeben, einen Fall hat er zugegeben, wo er Sex mit einer Minderjährigen hatte. Vielleicht sogar nicht ganz mit ihrem Willen und so. Und das hat er zugegeben, dafür hat man ihm eine Strafe gegeben. Und dadurch ist dann alles andere ist dann abverhandelt. Alle anderen Zeugen, da gibt's einen Haufen Frauen, die bereit sind zu erzählen, auszupacken, die werden jetzt nicht mehr gehört vor Gericht. So läuft das. Ja. Und der Jeffrey Epstein ist dann der Einzige, der für diese Affäre den Kopf hingehalten hat für 10 Monate. Ja, wahrscheinlich auch noch Luxusknast so als Milliardär irgendwo.
Kann ich mir vorstellen.
So High Life, ja. Und das Ding ist gegessen so. Und all die Leute, die da beteiligt waren, die sind sicher. Ja, und die Zeugen werden nicht mehr gehört. Ja. So, genau so läuft das.
Ja, aber das musst du mal vorstellen, solche Leute so wie Bill Clinton oder Father Bush oder sowas, die würden mal niemals mal in eine Gericht landen damit.
Nein, eben genau. Und die Zeugen, wenn das jetzt sagen, ja, aber da war zum Beispiel der und der Promi da am Start, die werden jetzt nicht mehr gehört. Du kannst als Zeugin jetzt dort nicht mehr das vor Gericht bringen, dein Fall. Weil das ist alles schon abgearbeitet. Ja.
Krass.
Wir wissen ja nicht, wie viele Fälle das sind. Ich meine, diese Insel, das geht ja über Jahre, über Jahrzehnte, ja. Weißt du? Ich meine, das kann man sich gar nicht vorstellen, wie weit das erreicht. Aber das ist jetzt nicht mehr justiziabel. So, das Ding ist durch. Ja.
Schön.
Ja, und diese Leute, wenn die jetzt gerade nicht auf ihren kranken Partys unterwegs sind, dann mauscheln die halt in Konferenzen wie oder Konferenzen ist fast falsch gesagt, in so Treffen wie Bohemian Grove oder Bilderberg, da handeln sie dann da ihre Kabale aus. Ich meine, das sind die Leute, die im Moment hier diese Welt regieren. Ja? Und das kann einfach auf Dauer nicht gehen.
Naja.
Das kann auf Dauer nicht gut gehen. Solche Leute führen einen nicht in die richtige Richtung. Ja.
Was ich auch interessant habe, hier Frank, ich habe mal das gerade mal hier geschaut. Und das ist natürlich wahrscheinlich nicht so gut für die westliche Welt. Denn das ist eine feindliche Insel in die Karibik. Dann bleiben wir kurz mal in die Karibik. Aber es scheint, dass kubanische Wissenschaftler ist das gelungen, mal eine wohl ziemlich wirksame Impfstoff gegen Lungenkrebs mal zu entwickeln. Na, das sind die Feinde. Das sind die Feinde. Hey, pass auf. Die Leute vom 9/11, die Helfer dort, Freiwillige, die keine Hilfe von ihrem eigenen Land bekommen haben, sind mit Michael Moore, so das ist gefilmt, darüber gegangen, die Feuerwehrleute und die Regierung von Kuba hat denen auf ihre Sozialmedizin mal geholfen und das für noch nicht mal eine Sechzehntel der Preis, was die mal bezahlen müssten in den USA für ihre Medikamente. Aber nichtsdestotrotz, 15 Jahre lang arbeiten die Forscher mal an den Impfstoff, der den Namen Zimmervax trägt und an dem nun auch die USA interessiert ist. Oh! Also die USA, wenn ich mich mal richtig erinnern kann, die waren auch interessiert an irgendwie so Havanna, 3 Años und 7 Años rum und paar Monte Cristos und paar Tagas Zigarren. Ey, Alter, weißt du, ich als Amerikaner mit meinem Pass musste über 2 Länder reisen und keine Stempel von Kuba dürfte ich mal in meinem Pass haben, wenn ich dorthin reisen will. Und die andere Ding ist, dass wenn du kubanische Zigarren mit kubanischen Zigarren am Flughafen erwischt wird, würden die alle konfisziert.
Ach komm, ey.
Ja, I'm telling you, man, so ist das. Aber jetzt, Lungenkrebs, was denkst du mal? Weißt du, warum die USA das haben will? Weil die wollen mal gucken und sagen, was können wir mal jetzt mal stärker entwickeln, dass mal jetzt, wenn diese Problem eine Lösung hat. Well, anyway.
Boah, aber ich sagte, ey, wenn ich das höre, Impfstoff, Lungenkrebs, Kuba, ich sagte, das rührt bei mir eine ganz, da gehen die roten Flags hoch,
Erzähl
wie der
mal,
Merkel sagt,
warum.
oder die Alarmglocken. Ja, das ist eine längere Geschichte. Ich kann das jetzt spontan nicht machen, aber das werden wir in den nächsten Shows irgendwann mal anspielen. Das ist eine ganz, ganz krasse Story, die unterwegs ist, die zurückgeht auf die 50er Jahre, 40er Jahre.
Als Amerika noch dort war,
und die
mit
auch
die ganzen
zu tun hat,
Mafias und so.
ja genau, und die auch zu tun hat dann mit dem Kennedy-Attentat und wo es um solche Dinge geht. Aber es ist eine lange Story und da muss ich nochmal intensiver nachrecherchieren. Ich werde dir da mal hier einen Link mal geben. So, da können wir mal in den nächsten Wochen mal drüber sprechen.
Na, auf jeden Fall diese sogenannte Zimmerfax, was die...
Klimavax oder so.
Nein, Zimmervax. Zimmervax ist das.
Ja, Entschuldigung.
Ja. Zimmervax wird nach einer abgeschlossenen Strahlen- oder Chemotherapie eingesetzt und verhindert das Wachstum von neuer Tumoren. Na, und so kann die oft tödliche verlaufende Krankheit gestoppt werden. Hey.
Das Interessanteste, was ich an dieser Nachricht finde, Alex, und das ist auch schon mal so ein Clou auf diese Story, die ich so angedeutet habe. Das Interessanteste ist, dass es ja, wenn du einen Impfstoff gegen Krebs halt machst, das heißt, dann wäre Krebs ja ein Virus.
Ja, well.
Weil sonst Impfen funktioniert ja nur gegen ein Virus.
Ja.
Und ist Krebs eine Viruserkrankung? Das ist eine interessante Frage. Baby. Das ist Hot Stuff, ja. Das ist Hot Stuff.
Ja, natürlich.
Ich sag dir, das ist Hot Stuff, ja.
Okay. Ja, Frank, so, das
Kubaner.
war... Ja, ey, aber you know something, da kannst du mal sehen. Also, die Leute, die eigentlich unsere Feinde sind, westliche Feinde, sage ich mal, also hier kommen kubanische Leute rüber. Ne?
Aber die haben doch jetzt Frieden gemacht, glaube ich. War das nicht so? Ich meine, war nicht Amerika, die haben doch erst vor ein paar Wochen, haben die sich doch richtig wieder getroffen, oder?
Also ich weiß es nicht. Ich wusste, dass mal Barack Obama
ist doch jetzt
wollte
Peace,
mal mit denen. Ich bin nicht 100% sicher.
Jetzt ganz erst kürzlich, ja, müssen wir nochmal nachrecherchieren. Aber ich glaube, dass so der ewige Zwist zwischen USA und Kuba, das ist jetzt eigentlich beiseite gelegt. Ja. Ich glaube auch die Sanktionen sind auch, weiß nicht, ob ganz aufgehoben, aber doch, glaube ich, sehr gelockert worden. Ne? Also wahrscheinlich kannst du jetzt auch mal wieder eine Zigarre rauchen in den USA.
Weil Arnold Schwarzenegger, die haben seine Zigarre nie konfisziert.
Ja, der hat ein Diplomatenköfferchen, ne? Die Diplomatic Boxers, da darf man nichts rausnehmen, so. Apropos, hier, so Diplomatenköfferchen. Das ist auch eine spannende Nachricht hier, vom Wochenende. Am Wochenende waren ja Wahlen in Bremen.
Okay.
Bremen ist ein Bundesland, Alex. Ja,
das
ist kein Bundesland, aber die haben ein eigenes Parlament.
Es ist innerhalb Niedersachsen. Ist in der Mitte von Niedersachsen.
Genau, aber aus irgendwelchen komischen Gründen ist es ein eigenes Bundesland, hat dementsprechend ein eigenes Parlament, eine eigene Landesregierung und so weiter. Und die haben gewählt am Sonntag, ja. Und ich will jetzt ja gar nicht auf diese ganzen Parteiendinge eingehen, aber was interessant ist, bei der Auszählung der Stimmen gab es im Büro des Wahlleiters einen Stromausfall. Na, check that out. Wie ist es? Hast du schon mal erlebt, dass es in irgendeinem Büro auf einmal einen Stromausfall gibt? Also nicht im Stadtteil oder so, sondern nur in diesem Büro. Während die Stimmen ausgezählt wurden, für 20 Minuten gab es da keinen Strom mehr. Das riecht nach Mauschelei, Alex. Ja, das riecht nach Mauschelei. Weil ich meine, Strom brauchst du bei der Auszählung heutzutage. Es läuft alles auch über
Computer
und so weiter. Und ich meine, wie kommt es auf einmal ein Stromausfall im Büro des Wahlleiters? Das sind genau 20 Minuten, da kannst du dann irgendwas mauscheln, danach gehen die Rechner wieder an und die Zahlen sind so, wie man sie haben will.
Krass.
Es gab solche Berichte auch aus Schottland. Ja, da war doch letztes Jahr dieses Referendum in Schottland, ja, wo die Frage, ob sich Schottland von Großbritannien abspaltet.
Ja.
Da gab's das auch.
Was,
da gab's auch.
Ja,
da gab's auch. Es ist so. Alex, es ist so. Das könnt ihr nachrecherchieren. Das ist kein Scheiß. Da gab's auch Stromausfälle beim Auszählen. Ja. Und da sind auch mittlerweile, also wenn man sich damit beschäftigt, in Schottland ganz viele Leute bringen ganz viel Material vor, dass dort auch gemauschelt wurde, damit das Ergebnis so ausfällt, wie man es haben möchte. Und in Schottland wurde er auch gewählt jetzt vor kurzem und da haben dann eben auch die die schottischen Nationalisten oder Nationalpartei, wie auch immer, die haben dann eben auch ganz, ganz hoch gewonnen, ja, weil die Leute in Schottland richtig sauer sind. Weil die davon überzeugt sind, dass das gemauschelt wurde. Und da gab es eben auch das Stromausfälle, ja, wie das schönes Ding, wie zufällig.
Ja.
Im Büro des Wahlleiters.
Krass. Krass. That's the way. Ich habe mal hier gerade mal ein heißes Bericht, gerade jetzt frisch aus Chemnitz angekommen, Frank. 2 Frauen setzten sich mal nach einer versuchten Kinderaussetzung mit viel Zivilcourage für einen 4-jährigen Jungen ein. Ist das abgefahren? Sie bemerkten in die Straßenbahnlinie Nummer 6, dass eine Frau nach dem Ausstieg ihren kleinen Sohn mal in der Bahn zurückließ. Ein 45-jähriger Zeugin rannte die junge Mutter bis zur Endhaltestelle nach, während ein weiterer Zeuge mal sich offenbar mal an den Jungen gekümmert hat und die Bundespolizei verständigte. Wenig später trafen mal die Beamten ein und fanden die 23-jährige alte Mutter zusammen mit ihrem Sohn in einen Bahnsteig vor und offenbar war die Frau auf dem Weg ins Ausland gewesen, ohne ihren Sohn. Aha. Das Kind wurde ihr vorerst entzogen und in eine Pflegefamilie abgegeben. Ist das krass?
Tja, sowas passiert, ja. Soziales Elend, solche Dinge gibt's ja.
Weißt du,
traurig.
Ich muss mal was hier dazu sagen, ne? Alle reden darüber, ist das Frank, weißt du was, wir gehen zu den Mars, um zum Entdecken zu sehen und zu gucken, ob da etwas wie sagt man, außerirdische Leben gibt, you know? Jetzt muss man mal vorstellen, wenn es tatsächlich mal irgendwo hier eine höhere Intelligenz gibt, kannst du dir vorstellen, dass ihr Ministerium da sitzt und kann darauf gar nicht warten, dass wir mit unserer Plastikscheiße mal und was weiß ich, Toilettenpapier mit Mandelgeruch und sowas mal alles von uns bekommen können. Aber was würden die da sagen, wenn die hören, dass Müttern sitzen ihre Kinder aus auf der Straßenbahn und so und Scheiße. Ich kann mir vorstellen, dass diese Außerirdische können es nicht erwarten, bis die was von uns lernen, oder?
Ja, genau so ist es. Sehr, sehr interessantes Gedankenspiel. Da gibt's auch ein Buch von Stanislaw Lem, polnischer Science-Fiction-Autor. Richtig cooles Zeug hat er geschrieben.
Okay.
So, Stanislaw Lem. Und ich glaube, das Buch, wo die Story vorkommt, das heißt der Futurologische Kongress. Richtig cooles Buch. Stanislaw Lem. Kann ich euch empfehlen? Der Futurologische Kongress. Und dort ist, glaube ich, genau dieses Szenario. Da ist einer so sozusagen auserwählt auch von der Erde und spricht dort zu irgendwie welchen galaktischen so zu seinem Ausschuss und muss halt die überzeugen, dass die Menschheit eigentlich auch ganz cool ist und dort hingehört und dann wird es aber eben ganz schwer, dann solche Dinge zu erklären, ja? Also Kriege oder so soziales Elend. Ich meine, wie kann man sowas dann erklären? Ne?
Ja.
Also jetzt vernünftig so. Was ist denn der Sinn, wenn dann jemand fragt, und warum macht ihr das und so? Und
vor allem, wenn du mal in die neue Club einsteigen willst. Naja, wir können das anbieten. Wir haben Serienmörder, wir haben mal hier Krieger, wir haben Frauen, die ihre Kinder mal in irgendwelche Mülleimern schmeißen.
Wir haben Großwildjäger.
Also krass.
Hey, we've got it all.
Krass. I'll tell you, man, that's fucking crazy. Aber dass eine Mutter, you know, das ist einfach nur traurig. Wenn ich sowas höre, dass Kinder, weißt du, dann muss ich mal sagen, dann hast du mal einen Mensch, so wie ich, Frank, ich habe mal 2 Kinder verloren. Und hier, Leute, die keine Kinder haben wollen, die kriegen mal gesunde Kinder. Und was machen die? Die lassen die auf der fucking Bahn zurück und fliegen in den Ausland.
Aber das ist auch so, wir wissen ja nicht die ganze Story, was da wirklich ist. Das sind ja solche Tragödien, da ist ja mal auch eine Vorgeschichte und so.
Ja, aber wenn die stellen fest, dass sie mal ein Abflugticket hat, mal hier vom Flughafen, dass sie in Ausland geht, aber laut ihrem Flugticket, dass sie nur alleine fliegt, ohne ihren Sohn. Was denkst du denn?
Ja, aber letztens wissen wir zu wenig. Wer weiß, was es für eine Geschichte ist. Ja? Wer weiß, wer zum Beispiel, da ist gar nicht erwähnt, der Vater, um was geht's da überhaupt? Ja, es sind Tragödien. Ich meine, die passieren ständig unter uns Menschen und das ist natürlich heftig, aber da wissen wir einfach auch nicht die ganze Geschichte. Aber schlimm ist es. Letztens ist ja auch mal so, ja, das Jugendamt übernimmt es dann, aber das ist dann auch oft nicht immer einfach, ja, für die Kinder. Also ob das dann, naja gut, wenn die Mama dich im Bus zurücklässt, dann ein Kind braucht halt nur mal irgendjemanden. Ne?
Also, hast du noch was du mal gerne vortragen möchtest?
Unbedingt. Ich habe eine Nachricht habe ich noch und die führt uns vielleicht auch so langsam dann zu dem Thema, was dann
Mit,
gleich in ein paar
Ross
Minuten
Hamilton,
haben mit
ja.
Ross Hamilton.
Ja.
Es geht um einen Kraftort in Deutschland, der Untersberg. Der Untersberg im Berchtesgadener Land. Habt ihr bestimmt schon mal gehört. Ich will jetzt auch gar nicht die ganze Story erzählen vom Untersberg, das machen wir vielleicht ein andermal. Sehr interessant, könnt ihr auch gerne googeln, gibt's ganz viel drüber, auch auf Deutsch, so Untersberg. Aber was jetzt die aktuelle Nachricht ist, am Untersberg gibt's einen Bach, der heißt Weißbach. Und der Weißbach hat sich, jetzt habe ich das Datum nicht aufgeschrieben, aber genau an dem Tag, wo das Erdbeben in Nepal war, ja, hat sich der Weißbach tiefrot verfärbt. Tiefrot. Und ist unten im Dorf angekommen so und halt der Bach ist rot. Und die Leute haben erstmal alle Angst gehabt, haben gedacht irgendwie, irgendeine Umweltsauerei oder sowas, wobei der kommt aus den Bergen, ich meine, da oben ist nix. Ja. Aber man hat auch ganz schnell gemerkt, nee, das ist kein Dreck oder so, sondern die Ursache war, es gab einen Felssturz, einen Felsabriss irgendwo am Hang und dort ist halt sehr rötliches Gestein,
eisenhaltig.
Eisenhaltig und das hat diesen Bach verfärbt. Ja. Aber interessant ist halt doch, der Untersberg gilt für viele als der Kraftort schlechthin in Deutschland. Manche sehen den auch im Europa oder im weltweiten Rang, also ganz bedeutsam. Ja.
Okay.
Und das genau an dem Tag passiert ist. Ja. Dieser Bach verfärbt sich dann tiefrot am Tage des Erdbebens in Nepal. Ja. Und da haben die Einheimischen dann berichtet, das letzte Mal, dass der Bach sich so rot gefärbt hat. Das ist schon mal passiert. Das war 1939, am Vorabend des Zweiten Weltkriegs. Ja.
Echt?
Ah, der Untersberg. Ja. Das ist also wieder rot gefärbt. Ja. An dem Tag, wo es in Nepal gerappelt hat. Wo es jetzt auch wieder nochmal gerappelt hat.
Ja, genau, das wollte ich mal gerade sagen. Das gab schon mal Nachbeben. Also,
Ich meine, ich bin jetzt nicht abergläubisch oder so und sage mir, oh, wow, der Weißenbach ist rot verfärbt. Aber ich wollte es einfach nur erwähnen, weil es interessant ist. Der Untersberg ist ein besonderer Ort. Ja. Da habe ich keinen Zweifel so.
Ja.
Das ist ein Kraftort in Deutschland. Und immer wenn an Kraftorten Dinge passieren, weißt du, wir können sowas auch nachher den Ross Hamilton fragen. Wir könnten eigentlich direkt diese Geschichte fragen, was er davon hält. Ja. Denn aus meiner Sicht ist es so, also so Kraftorte sind Natur. Und alles, was dort passiert, was die Natur macht, hat auch damit zu tun mit dem Kraftort. Das ist ein Spiegel. Ja. Wie das Wetter dort ist und sowas. Ja, wir können zum Beispiel da nachher mal den Ross darauf ansprechen, an diesem Serpent Mount, da gibt's auch jede Menge seltsame Wetterphänomene zum Beispiel. Ja. Also all diese Sachen, man muss es ganzheitlich betrachten. Ja. Da passiert nichts zufällig. Ja. Ja. Die Indianer haben ja früher sowas auch gemacht, zum Beispiel den Medicine Walk, ein Medizinwanderung, ja. Medizinwanderung würde man bei uns sagen. Das ist auch so eine Art, wo du dir die Natur zunutze machst, um ein Problem zu lösen, was du im Kopf hast. Ey, du brauchst eine neue Vision, du weißt nicht, wie es weitergeht. Das soll ich jetzt in die heutige Zeit übertragen? Irgendwelche Probleme mit, einer Partnerschaft oder jobmäßig, soll ich den Job annehmen oder nicht? Soll ich wirklich den Wohnort verlassen? Also wann auch immer man so große Entscheidungen hat im Leben, ja, und man weiß nicht genau, dann kann man, wenn man so der Indianer-Tradition folgt, einen Medicine Walk machen. Gehst du einfach mal, nimmst du dir mal einen Tag, machst es morgens schon für dich selber ein kleines Ritual, wo du sagst, heute gehe ich wandern und ich möchte, dass mir die Natur zeigt, was richtig ist. Und ich möchte möglichst auch offen sein und so. So starte mal mit einem Ritual und dann gehst du einfach mal in die Natur. Ja. In den Wald. Ohne Ziel, lässt dich einfach mal treiben. Und bist mal ganz aufmerksam. Was siehst du? Was begegnet dir? Was für Tiere begegnen dir? Was für Pflanzen begegnen dir? Was für Menschen begegnen dir? Gibt es irgendwelche Zwischenfälle? Was ist los? Ja? Alles. Und wenn du dann abends nach Hause kommst, ja, dann auch wieder in so einem Ritual das mal setzen lassen und dann mal in aller Ruhe schauen, was ist dir heute passiert. Und dann, es ist wirklich erstaunlich, ich habe es aber selber schon gemacht, da werden auf einmal wirklich die Dinge klar. Ja? Ja. Die Natur kann dir diesen Spiegel hingeben. Ja? Ja. Und an Kraftorten ist genauso was passiert. Und deswegen halte ich diese Nachricht jetzt schon durchaus für erwähnenswert, wenn an so einem Ort wie dem Untersberg es ist nichts Übernatürliches, es ist ein Naturphänomen, was dort passiert ist, aber man muss das ganzheitlich sehen. Das ist dann schon interessant. Also ich würde sagen, keine Panik machen so, aber es ist interessant.
Da gibt es eine Firma aus der 70er Jahre, die so ähnlich ist. Das nennt sich mal Walkabout. Okay. Kennst du diese Firma? Walkabout ist eine Rituale, das die Aborigines machen.
Ja, das ist so ähnlich, genau.
Na? Und wo die dann die Familie und ihre Tribe verlassen und wandern durch die Wüste und das Land und leben natürlich von das, was das Land ist. So kommt man in sein Erwachsenheit rein oder so, wie man das nennt.
Genau, das macht man natürlich genau bei den Aborigines und auch bei Indianern. Und das können wir auch machen. Ja? Also wenn eben so, man kann es auch machen als eine Art Initiation eben zum Erwachsenenwerden. Ja. Wenn ein junger Mensch, jetzt mach du mal deinen Medicine Walk, wie echt so der Walkabout. Find mal du jetzt von der Natur den Spiegel so, und auch diese Kraft, wer du bist und wohin du vielleicht im Leben willst und so. Und sowas als ein Ritual machen und jetzt bist du aufgenommen in den Kreis der Erwachsenen oder sowas. Ja, sowas macht auf jeden Fall Sinn. Ne? Und das funktioniert. Das ist hat auch nichts mit irgendwie Einbildung zu tun. Das kann jeder mal selber machen. Wenn man da sich wirklich darauf einlässt, ist echt erstaunlich. Also da
sehr, sehr geil. Also dieser Film Walkabout ist sehr, sehr cool, weil, okay, das geht, und um diese Film, es geht darum, ist, dass da zwei Schulkinder, der Vater begeht Selbstmord und die Kinder sind gestrandet. Und die treffen diese junge Aborigine, keine Kommunikationsmöglichkeit, weil die sprechen Englisch und er spricht nur ihre einheimische Sprache. Und
Aboriginisch.
Irgendwas so, ne? Aboriginisch.
Stupid.
Frankie, let's do some music, man, weil es wird langsam Zeit, mal sehen, was passiert mal mit Ross hier. Ich hoffe, dass alles funktioniert. Wir legen los mal hier mit einem Titel, was du aus mal deine Bag of Tricks mitgebracht hast. Denn du hast, Ross Hamilton ist auch so mal ziemlich in Koryphäe, wie man das sagt, was die Native Indianer aus Amerika angeht.
Ja,
und
genau.
die ganze verschiedene Dinge. Und du hast hier einen Titel, Willie Trasher mit Indian Boy.
Ja, ich habe jetzt extra Musik mitgebracht. Ich habe dann ein Album, das heißt Sweetgrass Festival. Es ist ja nicht das Gras, was ihr denkt. Ja? Es ist nicht zum Rauchen. Nein, Sweetgrass, das gibt's ja wirklich so ein Präriegras. Und die Indianer benutzen es zum Räuchern. Nicht zum Rauchen, sondern zum Räuchern. Also du machst so diesen Sweetgrass.
So Fische oder sowas,
so ein Büschel,
mal Fleisch.
So ein Büschel. Nee, so eher so rituell, so ähnlich wie Salbei oder sowas.
Okay.
Ja. Also die machen dazu so Büschel draus und die kannst du entzünden und die machen halt einen ganz wohlriechenden, süßlichen Rauch. Das ist das Sweetgrass.
Okay.
Ja. Und das Sweetgrass Festival, ich weiß gar nicht, ob es noch gibt, aber in den 70ern war das in Kanada, glaube ich. Und dort sind halt alle möglichen Native Indian Musiker aufgetreten. Und gibt's eine richtig schöne CD, Sweetgrass Festival, sozusagen Indianermusik. Ja. Aber zeitgenössisch, also die machen jetzt keine Folklore oder so. Okay. Manches klingt auch nicht anders wie ein Country-Song, aber eben aus Indianer-Stories. Und auch die Texte sind zum Teil wirklich, wirklich cool. Und da habe ich mal ein bisschen was mitgebracht, weil das, glaube ich, tunt uns auch schön ein hier in Ross Hamilton und dann in diese nordamerikanische Prärie hier so.
Very cool. Na, das ist Willie Trasher mit Indian Boy. Und wir folgen das mal mit noch einem Titel von Mr. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Und das mit Running Down a Dream. So, little music für euch hier jetzt auf Radio Emergency in the Amok, Alex and Frank Stoner
Show. Das ist auch hier Running Down a Dream. Ja? Das passt eigentlich auch wieder zum Thema Your Walkabout. Das ist auch der Dream Walk und so.
Ja, genau.
Lauf mal deinen Traum und so.
Frankie, man.
Passt, ja.
Hey, deswegen funktioniert das zwischen uns mal, weil wir sind an derselben Vibe. We're in the same level, man. So, rock and roll in your face. Here he is, Willie Trasher, Indian Boy, und gleich danach Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers with Running Down a Dream.
Oh, und jetzt, liebe Hörer von Radio Emergency, ist es soweit. Unsere Connection nach Ohio ist am Start, ist erfolgreich. Wir hören noch ein bisschen hier die Drums, den Herzschlag,
die Drums, ja. Hier
Indianer
Radio
Trommel.
Emergency.
Get the heartbeat. Open yourselves up. And we're calling out Mr. Ross Hamilton. Are you out there? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well, Mr. Hamilton. And what a great honor for us that we have you on your show. Have a warm welcome, Mr. Hamilton.
Oh, the honor is mine.
Afternoon time in it's what, about 3:00 in the afternoon right now in Ohio, Mr. Hamilton? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. So you're in the afternoon. We're here at 9:00 in the evening in good old Germany. And this have you? What I wanted to find out from you, Mr. Hamilton, is that have you done any of your talks or any of your book promotions at all in Europe yet, or something like that, sir?
No, I was invited to go, but for health reasons, I couldn't make the trip.
Okay. Okay, I understand. So, yeah, Mr. Hamilton, we were talking about you're coming into the show today and doing an interview and telling us about your books and stuff like that. You got a lot of stuff that you have been researching, and a lot of things that are being found within the North American continent, and it's kind of pretty wild, the things that everybody's coming up with. What can you say to that, Ross?
The Americas were, of course, the New World back in our great-great-great-great-grandfather's time. And nobody really knew what was here. But when the first Spanish came over and then the French, they found many mysteries that to this day still stand as mysteries, even though anthropology and archaeology would rather just dispense with the historical past and move on to their version of history. So what we're dealing with here in Ohio, especially, are three major mysteries. Mm-hmm. Number one, there was supposed to have been a great country here about 7,000 to 6,000 years ago.
In America, in what we know as America.
Right. In eastern North America, there was supposed to have been a great country that was in the shape of a grand eagle or phoenix. Its head was the state of Michigan. Its wings spread out through New England and up into the Dakotas on either side. And its body went all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. Now, Indian legend referenced this to the first settlers that came in and said that they were just the remains of a once great country that slipped away and fell into darkness. Now, because of that ominous hint at prehistory, we began to do researches on any possible remnant of such a civilization. We had to, of course, remember that they would have been organic, and they may have addressed the way they treated nature differently from the way we treat nature today.
Well, I have to say, do you prefer that we call you Mr. Hamilton or Ross? What's more convenient, or what would you allow us to? How would you allow us to call you, Ross? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, Ross is fine.
Okay, Ross, I have to ask you. I mean, I was born in New York, and I've been living in Germany for 30 years. And going back to my grade school and stuff like that in the 60s, we were told that when Christopher Columbus got here, all he met was a bunch of savages and Indians. And you're explaining to us that you're telling me that there's a history that goes back even further than that, 7,000 years ago. That there was this great city, and what I need to know is, or what I'd like to find out, and I'm sure everybody else, is that how did you go about finding these facts and discovering these things?
It's a story that kind of details my life. Way back in 1969, I was initiated by a perfect master of spiritual science from India.
Oh, really? Okay.
Sant Kirpal Singh. And subsequently, I've meditated for over 45 years on the sound principle. And it's a source of opening up your spiritual faculties so that by listening to the sound, you acquire some internal vision along with your internal audition. And it helps a lot when you're studying the past, because you can take like a piece of legend or a little bit of mythology or just a story that has lost its authorship and meditate on it and use your internal faculties, and you can begin to resuscitate, or I guess the better word would be to bring back together the substance of that original story or myth. Mm-hmm. And I've had really good luck with the Greek myths in my personal researches, but I've had some uncanny good luck with Native American legend. especially after I was contacted by Native leaders. For example, Vine Deloria Jr., who is a famous Native author, sort of took me into his inner circle for a number of years, and we worked on a project together regarding extraordinarily tall stature among Native people in pre-contact times. And otherwise, we would find old accounts like the one I just described to you.
Yes.
Was mainly from a detail of a written piece of oral history from the Smithsonian Institute, of all places, which was submitted by J.W. Powell, John Wesley Powell, who was their first director of ethnology back in the 1880s. And Powell, who had been brought up with Indian people when he was a young man, heard these things. But as he grew older, he was unable to corroborate some of these fantastic legends he had heard. And also from Vine and other Native leaders, I've heard stories about how the people had a great deal of difficulty surviving just 5,000 years ago because there were beasts that were regarded, or we would regard as Pleistocene type beasts, still roaming the plains throughout North America and Canada and into Mexico. They said that there were creatures that were as large as dinosaurs, and they even speculated that they could have been some sort of, terrible lizard, and but also giant mammals, gigantic hogs that stood for between 7 and 10 feet at the shoulder, that were omnivores. They ate more than vegetables. They would eat anything they could catch. And that they thundered across the plains in these ancient times like buffalo did in later times. And there are stories of gigantic bear that were far longer than 16 or 17 feet. They were very dominating. And in those days, they said that the animal types would have leader animals who would be able to speak to them like with telepathy. And they could, just by the motions of their hands and feet and by the things they uttered from their throats, could get the other animals to do what they wished. But when the leader animals passed away, the other animals lacked more in intelligence or had less intelligence and were subject to disease and also being hunted by larger and more ferocious creatures. So in the same way, I'm almost finished here. In the same way that the Native people suggest to us today that men were at one time of larger stature and were far more spiritual and intelligent than men are today, but that somehow the lights went out inside of us and externally. We seem to have lost what the paradise was here.
So kind of like a Kali Yuga, they would call it in India, a dark age coming, and
exactly,
man losing its consciousness and
right. But they say that there was like a golden age here that lasted for 1,000 years, about 7,000 to 6,000 years ago, and they had splendid cities. We built our cities on top of them, and they were just like foundations of the buildings that had been replaced with earthworks to preserve their images. And that's why when we mapped many of the earthworks in Ohio and Michigan, Indiana, all the way down through the southern states, we find evidences of advanced geometrical, astronomical, and mathematical principles. For example, in my last book, Star Mounds, Legacy of a Native American Mystery, I show definitive evidence that some of the earthworks sustain Pythagorean, Euclidean, and other of the ancient Greek master mathematicians and geomants work.
That doesn't sound like savages, huh? I mean, that's higher mathematics included in the architecture of these structures.
Exactly, and the star patterns that fit with some of these foundations that, again, were preserved by the people about 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. The star patterns tell us that they may have originated the system that we use today with some differences, just a few differences. Like, for example, we've been able to match up precisely the earthworks in the Ohio Valley, many of them with existing star patterns that we consider of Greek or early European origin. So we think that this is a culture that had the knowledge of Greek geometry, astronomy, astrology, because they lived in these living astrological cities, and also they had knowledge of some sort of metallurgy akin to alchemy, because we found pieces of and there were a number of them that were found, they've disappeared now, of course, of copper that were somehow tempered to be as strong as steel.
Wow.
That's interesting. That's metallurgy, or how do you pronounce that?
Metallurgy.
Metallurgy, yeah. That's interesting, because, I mean, that's what they say, couldn't these savages have had, eh? Well, that's interesting.
Well, they say that about the prehistoric people, but now they're finding all over the place. They're finding hammers that are 10,000, 12,000 years old, that are encased in some kind of. What's very interesting, Ross, is that one of your expertise fields is also talking about finding these giants, giant skeletons all over the North American continent.
Right. This is where the research got pretty interesting. Back in 1998, 1999, we had been just on the internet. We just got onto the internet. And I had a friend, a lady friend, who lived up in Ohio further. I live in southern Ohio. Mm-hmm. She lives up around Columbus, the state capital.
Right.
And she wanted to partner with me on putting up a first website, which we dedicated to the earthworks and their mysteries. Okay. Well, that website's gone now, but one of our first subjects that we researched was what the pioneer people, what the first European people found when they came into the Ohio Territory. Mm-hmm. And what they found astonished us. So we dug up these old diaries from the 1700s and the 1800s, and the township records and the county records. And we found that everywhere where the farmers had Indian mounds on their property and dug into them, they found skeletons, usually at the base of the mound, that were of extraordinary size, usually about 7 feet in length. And there were hundreds of them. It's not like today where you have the occasional 7-footer. I think the statistics dictate that maybe 1 out of every 250,000 people could be taller than 6'10".
Yes.
Something like that.
Yes.
And to get to 7 feet, it's only 1 out of a million people. But there's a lot of 7-footers today. Mm-hmm. You see them playing basketball.
Right.
Yeah.
But for a race of people, they're about 3,000 years old, to have existed with their apparent leadership inbreeding with other clan heads that were also tall, we can see why many of these earthworks had a single or 2 or 3 very tall skeletons buried with people of average size. Most Indians were about 5'7" for the males and about 5'1" for the females. Mm-hmm. But there was this class buried with them, dressed the same way, although they were given honored burials because they had many copper implements and pearls and stones that were considered of great value to them. Various artifacts of flint, ear spools. It was like primitive jewelry, but it was as good as anything that was made by the hierarchical Africans when the first whites went in there. So this wasn't Golden Age stuff, but I wasn't worried so much about that. The question was, where did these very tall people come from? And as we spread out our search, we found they went all the way to the East Coast, up into Michigan, out into the Great Plains, and all throughout the Great South, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and so forth.
Excuse me for interrupting, Ross, but the thing is that it's very interesting that you say this, because I know for a fact that there has been archaeologists that have found the same type of skeletons in 7-8 meter length in Sicily in the 40s and in the 50s.
In Sardinia as well.
Sardinia, yeah. And the thing is that after these archaeologists passed away, the things that they have found have disappeared without anybody knowing what happened to them. And it's just astonishing that now even more from these skeletons are also being found on the North American continent.
Yeah, the tall stature seemed to have been sustained longer in North and Central America. We think that was because they didn't have a high population. There were probably 2 or 3 million people for all of North and Central America. And besides that, we think that they were well fed, and they were able to not make war with each other as often as they did in Europe, the Mediterranean, and Northern Africa. When you make war, you send the big men out first. That's just been a habit that most kings and army heads would cultivate. That is to make the tall men formidable and scary enough so that they could claim them to be their champions, and for the other army to put up their champion against theirs, and whoever won, then the other army would have to just give up. And that practice continued for some time, unless the two refused to fight or whatever, and then the armies would clash. But this would take the lives of all the big men. And so the genes, or the DNA that would have dictated taller stature, went into a recessive sort of mode. And that's why the average Englishman, around the time of the first Englishman in America, the average Englishman was around 5'2" or 5'3". That's the males. Right. And the women were in the low 5s to high 4 foot. Now, we don't go by meters here, gentlemen. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
We get along.
3 feet is about a meter for the audience. So it was just a wonderful discovery for us to begin to relate these very tall skeletons as perhaps being the remnant of this golden age, which existed about 4,000 years, or excuse me, 3,000 years before. 4,000. I'm sorry, 4,000 years before the general 7-foot height was found in the United States. Wow. So it was the Adena people, a name that we made up, who are given credit for having most of the genetics responsible for this widespread distribution of the very tall gene. So we think that the Adena were related to another tribe that the Indians call the Allegheny people, and that we have a mountain range named the Alleghenies, which actually is very close to New York.
Yes.
And the Alleghenies are a beautiful, very ancient range of mountains that extend into the Appalachians to the south.
Right.
And they're believed connected to when the continents divided. They are believed to go over into Scandinavia. It's the same mountains. So very close to you is the same range of mountains that the Allegheny were named after.
Wow, that's interesting. That's
Yeah, that's amazing. So Ross, you're saying these giants are human beings. They are so to say the forefathers of modern day Native Americans. So they were humans. They were not like any alien connection. Or there's also some people references to the Bible where they say the sons of the gods were marrying with the daughters of humans. So you're saying these are human beings. This is not genetically something different or something non-human. Correct?
Yeah, I'm personally convinced that there was no intercession from genome happy aliens. What we do have is a phenomenon I think is even more interesting. What we do currently is we tend to throw onto mysteries our current paradigms, whatever the culture likes to believe in, whether it's UFOs or ghosts or Bigfoot, we tend to see that more and more. For example, there was a TV series in the United States in the 80s called V, as in Victor, or Victory. And these craft I think they were shaped kind of like the letter V. And the show was pretty popular on TV. And then in New Jersey one night, witnessed by over 50,000 people, a whole armada of UFOs went over the state, and they looked exactly like the TV program. And it was a response to the psychic continuum, the belief that people have or want to have in a fantastic extension of the dull world that we live in. John Michel talks about it a lot. He says that from time immemorial, human beings have always been fascinated by the mythologies of the ancients because they're able to open their imagination, and there's a lot of good creative energy in that. So we tend to project our beliefs over current phenomena. So when this information about the giants was released by us, of course, it was taken up by a number of authors who didn't have our contact with Native people and didn't know the whole story. And as a result, they interjected the alien theory, and they also interjected a lot of the biblical theory. Now, the biblical theory is right, probably, but you have to put that in perspective. You have to take it out of the Bible and give it a little more substance without the religious overtones. A good example of that is in North America. Now, we believe that about 7,000 years ago, people were essentially probably about the height we are today. They're a little healthier than we were 3 or 4 centuries ago. Maybe 6, there was probably some tall people among us, just like today. But there was a project that was started by what we call the Master Power, and the Master Power is the sort of like the intelligent logos that sustains our planet and all life here. It's an intelligent power. It helps to keep the environment regulated, and it also helps to keep a balance between nature and men. But it's also a theater that we live in. Now, I didn't learn this from Native people. I learned this from India. And our planet is a very unique place. And it was designed to keep water at a liquid temperature and keep the warmth just so that water-based life and therefore human life could flourish. So in a way, it's a theater, and according to my sources, the theater runs programs. And there are lengthy programs, and they encompass sometimes thousands of years, sometimes just a few centuries. And they have gone through many different golden, silver, bronze and dark, or iron Kali-yuga type ages.
Yeah.
Over the eons. So in a way, we're very lucky to live in the theater, but in another way, we're all actors, and we all have our assigned roles as spirits who live in the bodies. We cannot basically do anything but a few minor details in our life because we have been contracted by the overseeing power, what we call the God power or the Christ power, the master power, to enact this theater. Okay, now if you can understand that, you can understand what I'm going to tell you about the giants.
Okay.
About 7,000 years ago, a project was started, as it was 7,000 years before that, 7,000 years before that, and so forth, back through time. There was a great civilization before 7,000 years ago. About 12,000 years ago, it folded up, and it was called Atlantis, and it had probably over 150 islands, basically where the Atlantic Ocean is now. Most of them were the size of England and Ireland, but a few were twice that size, and some were 3 times that size, including Atlantis. Now, itself, the capital island. Now, when the glaciers began to melt from the north, many of these islands, which were situated at what would soon be below sea level, were hidden, if you will, under the cloaking of the spiritual technology of the time, which is able to sort of move the magnetic flux of the earth into a protective sheath that would enable these islands to exist in what we call the etheric dimension, still physical, but it's hyperphysical, so that when the oceans did come up to the level they are today, the Atlantean archipelago actually was lifted up to a higher dimension. It's still there, and people still live there. They still have commerce and trade with other planets and so forth, but they're in the hyper-physical or lower astral plane. Now, in our part of the world, which is lacking in the ethereal life force, we undergo this drama where once every 7,000 years, we restore the life force to the gross 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional physical planet. And we cause it to interface with Atlantis again. And this takes about 1,000 years to complete the cycle. But at the beginning of the 7,000 years, there is a small community is initiated. And that community demonstrates these spiritual principles which were on Atlantis. And what they do is they convert the sky energy by using the Ark of the Covenant, if you will, through pyramidal structures or some sort of temple structures with spires or capstones, and draw the electrical energy out of the clouds, just like you read in Revelation 13:13. And they drew the fire down from the sky in front of witnesses, etc. Well, this was Atlantean type of technology, and what they do with that energy, which is like lightning, but it's controlled lightning, so it comes down in these beautiful, gracious streams of spiraling light without any crackling of thunder and so forth. Is it through these temples, which had these beautiful arcs burning inside them, they would convert that energy and draw the energy of the earth to it, which is a very positive energy, which comes from the magnetic field of the earth, with the earth rotating through that magnetic field as a sort of armature, producing this positive electrical charge. Well, we know that the negative electrical charge from the sky, the Zeus type of charge, and the positive electrical energy of the earth, the Gaia or the Demeter charge, When they commingle within these temples, which in the old days were dedicated to the 12 Titans, which represented the 12 ages. And then later, Zeus came along and he replaced the 12 Titans with the 12 Olympians, and they kind of refurbished the system. And that was basically at the end of Atlantis. Zeus took power. He was a politician before that. He achieved some sort of ascension. And for over 2,400 years, they were able to continue trade with the colonies of Atlantis, Egypt, Guatemala, Greece, England, Ireland, and Scandinavia, especially the areas which would be most affected by the floods when they come up, and also North America. And then gradually, as the waters raised up, they had to close down each island, and all that was left was Cuba. And Cuba has an etheric body which has what we call Mount Olympus on it. And then finally, they had to close down Olympus as the waters came up too high. Mm-hmm. And at that time, this project was commenced. And it started in the Ohio Valley, and it began to resuscitate the earth by taking the sky energy, commingling it with the earth energy, and it makes this stuff we call prana, or vitality, or chi.
Okay. I understand that through martial arts, because that's the whole idea, is that in order to get that inner strength and exert it to let it leave your body, that's gathering all that energy from inside. I know that from martial arts. Prana is I believe the Indian word for that, isn't it?
That's a Sanskrit word.
Yeah.
Wilhelm Reich called it orgo, and that's, I guess, the same thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Russ, this is such amazing information that you're presenting here. Let me ask this, and to make it clear that I understand that right. You're saying that these megalithic sites, old temples, we're talking about megalithic time. You say that these temples had also a sort of a technical function that had to do with energy, and that had to do to unite the energies, sky energies and earth energies, so to say, and kind of building a bridge. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Now, this technology isn't widespread today because we don't have the intellectual capacity or the means to cooperate with other nations and races to effect it, to enact it. But the time is the time is virtually upon us when this technology must return in order to stop the earthquakes and to begin to control the weather by normal means. Now, in the ancient times, even in times prior to Atlantis, the entire Earth used to make complete use of its magnetic field and would convert it into life force energy, and it had two aspects. The energy of the sky was made from the part of the magnetic field that moved through the atmosphere, and the energy of the Earth was made from the part of the magnetic field that the Earth rotated through. So it was up to the gods, or men in those days, to what we call steward the earth. And to steward the earth, you create these temples, which are actually interchanges. They're scientific instruments that were dedicated to deities to make the whole process holy. Mm-hmm. And they would constantly, day and night, using the Ark of the Covenant as the sort of jump starter, they would evoke the powers of the sky to join with the powers of the earth. And that stuff that they made in the temple bowels, and they had gyroscopes in some of these temples to keep a good stirring going. Uh-huh. And they had pools of water, or sometimes pools of some other combinations, sometimes quicksilver, and they would embed this alchemical energy, this life force energy, into the water. and then they would pump it out, just like we pump water to our houses today from these large central pumps in your cities. And everybody would have this life force, light, coming into their homes, and they ran it through the same way a magnetic field is made by winding a copper wire around a piece of iron. Well, they would have these coils coming into the kitchens, and you could put your cooking utensils into them, and however much you use would be taken into the food, because food tends to need it. Mm-hmm. Everything needs this stuff. That's why it evaporates almost as soon as it's made, unless you can make a lot of it. Lightning makes a little bit of it when it hits the earth, but the plants absorb it so fast. That's why you see plant growth at an accelerated rate just after a thunderstorm, because of the rainwater so highly charged with this life force.
Wow.
In any case, in Atlantis and places like that, the people drank light, and they ate light, and not just their kitchens, but their entire houses, their dwelling places were luminous, because the life force was impregnating everything. The more that was made from the central temple of a given town or city, the more matter absorbed it, until matter couldn't absorb anymore, and then it would simply move into a higher frequency. Wow. And it only takes just a few centuries to transform an entire planet significantly into a higher level of consciousness by using this kind of technology that was used. So now we see a project called the Phoenix Rising, and we saw it 7,000 years ago.
Okay.
First, you have the little phoenix is nothing but a worm, and then the worm is given a lot of attention, and pretty soon we see all knowledge contained in the worm, and then the worm is enacted, made into a sort of a Manitou or a statue or a temple, and then that temple is given the life force energy, and the Manitou of the worm, eventually, as it's given more and more life, it grows into the phoenix again, and its head took up the state of Michigan, and so forth. But in the beginning, it was just the Serpent Mound. So for 1,000 years, the phoenix grows and becomes the giver of light, and the entire world understood the message of Atlantis for 1,000 years. And then 6,000 years ago, the lights of New Atlantis, of the Great Phoenix, began to diminish. And the people that lived here were mostly agricultural, and they did a lot of mining and a lot of ceramics. And they sent their food stuff to other parts of the world, which were very much in darkness, of course, 7,000 years ago, because Atlantis was already 5,000 years gone. And so there was also a lot of inbreeding between the people here, who had grown to enormous size because they were eating like an Atlantean diet of light, and it brings out the vestigial aspects of one's DNA. And so the third eye was open, and the people here, we did find some skeletons that were carefully preserved bloodlines that were 10 feet in height. And so we believe that there were colossi here, men and women who were anatomically perfect, but they were 10, perhaps even 12 feet in height. And they grew out of people probably starting about 7,000 years ago that were not that tall, but by eating these foods and by observing the growth of their spirituality, and by declaring peace, and just becoming unified with the creative spirit of nature, they very quickly had the ideal environment. and their bodies just got to be normal sized again.
Wow, that's
so. Yeah,
I'm sorry, Ross. What you're telling,
amazing, huh?
what you,
Wow.
everything you're saying. I'm getting connections. So many connections.
Right. Same with me, Alex.
You know, I'm saying to myself, well, the facts that you're laying down for us can very much say that a story like David and Goliath actually took place. There was a giant that David fought against, or I mean, that's one thing.
It might even be an allegory on giant people and small normal people, so to say, in a confrontation.
What the other thing that what hit me is that Ross explaining through these temples and this light, and naturally when I hear this light, I'm asking myself, is that what the Illuminati is trying to achieve?
That's a good question, because Illuminati means light, isn't it? Illuminated.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Ones,
yeah,
there's always, in the end of the day, it comes always back to this light, life force, life energy.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Is that
and the question of controlling this?
Could the Illuminati be trying to get this? What's your thoughts on that, Ross?
Well, you know, one would logically think that the so-called Illuminati, which some people think are just wealthy people and have a lot of gold.
Okay.
But let's say just for the sake of argument that that's not the Illuminati. The Illuminati are the ascended masters, the saints, and the great initiates from the past. You know, the kind of men that only incarnate in India nowadays. The understanding of the Illuminati tells us that there is a group of men who, without using financial means, by using love as their weapon of choice, have been and are attempting to convince men who abide by the darkness, the rich and powerful, you know, and the bankers and those who have created the great inequity in our planet, are attempting to use all of their light to convince the wealthy and the prestigious to stop doing what they're doing and follow the way of the renunciant. Give away your wealth or let it be used to enhance the earth, not destroy it. And so there's a great confusion now that because wealthy people are receiving more favor from the enlightened ones, that the wealthy people are the enlightened ones, because we can't see any further than that. But a lot of emphasis is being placed on quite frankly, the dark ones who have hoarded all the money to change their ways, to become more conscious of the environment. Yes, to answer your question, if you look at it that way, yeah, the Illuminati is working toward that, but not the wealthy, not the bankers and the heads of the big drug companies, Dow Chemical, Bayer, those kinds of corporations, Monsanto. There's dozens of them. They're out to get the money, and they don't care whose life they ruin to do it, and they don't care whose land or sea they have to poison to get what they want.
Right.
It's a wicked thing. Now, when the phoenix rises and men are restored to their right sense of mind and spirit, these kinds of forces cannot exist. They just get to be such a bad idea that nobody wants to practice them anymore. And that's what we're shooting for. By example, we want to show how, without it costing anything, we can grow things better than Monsanto and all their genetic manipulation could ever produce. And this is done by adding that life force to the seeds and to the soil. So we have to set up these stations again. The only hitch is that the use of the ark is restricted. People don't know how the ark was originally used or if it even works. But without the ark to do it, you'd have to build places where lightning strikes regularly in order to contact enough of the earth current to draw lightning down from the sky. And so in the old days, they would build the pyramids with a chamber in there, which, like in the Great Pyramid, we call it the King's Chamber, because Osiris was placed in a box. It was really an ark. And they put the lid on the box with a lot of silica in the box. And since the box was lined with gold on all of its internal sides, and each side was phased directly opposite the other, so that the laser-like effect happened. And since silica has a very small amount of light, that light began to accumulate back and forth inside the ark, just like a laser puts light back and forth from a mirror, and then the more porous mirror it sends out. Well, the top part of the ark had these two contacts, anode and cathode, the two angels.
Right, where they're touching the wings of each other.
Right.
Yeah.
And on Atlantis, they had large crystal lenses between those two figures. And when the energy from their arcs came up, it was a divine energy, and they could see anywhere they wanted just by having the same type of frequency on somewhere else.
Wow.
Just like TV today, just like TV and radio today. But, I don't want to digress, but in order to get that reaction between sky and earth and get the two currents, one which is receiving of electrons, the other which must have electrons to make it non-toxic,
right?
Must have the positive charge. Positive charge has a lot of magnetic flux, but very few electrons.
Right.
And it's like the charge you get when you walk across a carpet.
Right.
You touch somebody. There's electrons there, but there's a lot of magnetic energy. And when that combines with the cloud energy, it makes this life energy. And that gets pumped out into the earth. And the first thing that absorbs it will be the earth and the stones. And they'll serve as capacitors. And they'll drink up as much as they can, because basically everything in our world is lacking in this stuff. You see more of it after you die and you go into the astral plane, where most people's heavens are. I don't care if you're Buddhist or Jain or Christian or whoever. Your heavens are better than this. And because there's more of what we call the spiritual matter in there, the true substance. And so when we're able to, with this covenant, with the divine, able to manufacture this stuff, everything benefits from it. And Earth becomes more like a heavenly plane. And in the days of Atlantis, there was very little difference between Atlantis and the planes above, because Atlantis was so well enriched. The problem and the trick is that if we don't steward it, if we don't keep the fires burning in the temples, the arc fires burning, they will fall into disuse. The fuel will burn out. And that's that white powdered gold. They find that stuff all over the place. That was, on the sites where after all the silica or whatever they relieved of its electrons is finished, the arc goes dead, and they have to carry the ark out of the pyramid or wherever, and they dump it. So you find a lot of this stuff where they used to dump the ark, then they fill it up with fresh, clean material and put it back, put the lid on it, and then the reaction starts again. They get out of the way. And so Osiris was able to rule all of Egypt from after death, because he was the sun. And that put out a protective aura all around Egypt. And that allowed the rains to come regularly and yielding, and they grew corn right out of the sand, because there's so much of that etheric energy that you don't need dirt. You just need water and the etheric energy. And the seed is able to project its entire image into its fullness. They did it at Findhorn in Scotland, too. There was a philosophical experiment there in the 60s and 70s. It's no longer being conducted, but they were able to, right out of sand, using a spiritual technology similar to what I described, able to grow record-breaking vegetables and fruits.
Wow,
Nobody knows how they did it. They just said they cooperated with the, with the fairies and the divas, which is only part of it. So once we're able to do this, the masters created this figure of a phoenix beneath the landscape of eastern Canada and the United States, which was agreed upon that it would serve as the carrier of light for the rest of the world. So even though America is extremely corrupt and dark right now, it's an ideal place for the light to come from because of the contrast. So once every 7,000 years, that worm rises up and becomes the great phoenix and feeds the entire world with its spiritual technology. And then starting 6,000 years ago, it folded its wings. And finally, 5,000 years ago, it was entirely extinct. It burnt itself in a nest that was the earthworks of the Ohio Valley, burned down to their foundations, which I described earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And then those foundations were preserved by the native people.
That's so amazing, Ross. And well, there's so many things popping up, but one thing I want to throw in, because it was just recently in the last few weeks, they were making excavations in Mexico at Teotihuacan, this famous city of the gods in Mexico. They're excavating there, and right beneath one of those two pyramids, I'm not sure it was the pyramid of the sun or the moon. There's two of these big ones. But they discovered that very deep below there's a Stollengang. How do you say that? A cave works.
It's like a cavern.
Right,
like
a cavern, exactly. And just recently, it was only a few weeks back, it was announced in the media. In these caves, right at the center of this pyramid, they found lots of stains of mercury. Really a lot of it, and this fits so perfectly in what you're saying, that all these sites had something to do with harvesting, maybe not the right term, but with connecting energies, and they just found that 3 weeks back or so.
Yeah, mercury is a wonderful element. Some of the lore that's espoused by philosophers, initiate philosophers, says that originally mercury was a luminous, very sweet, very nurturing nectar that came off of a special type of tree that was nurtured by the ark or some similar device, and that it was guarded as the tree of life. It was one species that produced this stuff, and that they used to store it in vats beneath the earth, this luminous nectar, and that they attained immortality by drinking this nectar. And then they would urinate it out in the form of quicksilver, and their urinals they would mix them with sulfur to a certain extent, which was the food that they ate, which was like the ambrosia, which came from another tree, and it turned into it wasn't sulfur, but the sulfur atom was what the etheric body was based upon. And that's why we find these huge deposits of cinnabar at different places in the earth, because they were the urinals and the former latrines of the gods.
Yeah, interesting.
So,
that fits perfectly into the scenario we have in Mexico there.
But the thing is that, as we know, mercury is a very dangerous substance for a human being.
Well, Alex, that's what they tell us. But I can remember in India, I saw people, sadhus, holy men, that they were working with mercury, and for them, in a chemical sense, mercury is the element of transformation. So, they tell us it's bad, it's evil, it's dangerous, but actually, if you know how to use it, it can be quite beneficial as well.
Ross, any comment on that?
Mercury is one of those amazing elements that by itself is not toxic. It is if you breathe it in. For a lot of it, it can give you various diseases of the respiratory system. Mm-hmm. But when mercury combines with a toxic element, it multiplies the toxicity of the element.
Okay.
All right.
So when fish eat mercury compounds, it works itself into their tissues, and you're not eating just the mercury making you sick. You're eating a compound that has mercury in it, which has made the toxin more toxic.
I understand.
So in India, they take pure mercury, and without volatilizing it, they blend it with sulfur and other specific elements like mica and others that are mentioned in many of the old alchemical texts. And they're able to work using acids and alcohol and the regular bakings in the oven. They're able to create medicines that are transcendent of medicines that we have today. They're able to cure virtually any disease. The Chinese talk about Tan, or the divine cinnabar, which was related to have been able to cure any disease by the ancient masters of the Taoist science. And similarly, in India, there is an antique tradition, probably older than the Chinese, which has kept the understanding of the 9 crucibles cinnabar a sacred concept, in that not only does the individual attain immortality by properly resuscitating cinnabar, but the individual is also able to transmute lead into gold by adding small amounts of this perfected cinnabar to regular lead. It enhances the life and the vibrational quality of the lead with what we would call a pigment. A pigment is so effective that once it spreads out, it literally reforms the lead atom, which is atomic number 82, into an atom of gold, 82 or 81. I think it's 82, which is just 2 steps away. Mercury is atomic number 80. Gold is 79. Mm-hmm. So you see, by just a very careful and cautious maintaining great purity, manipulation of mercury and sulfur, cinnabar can be created that, when added to lead, can produce gold in small quantities.
I have to, what really amazes me is that listening to all this information that you have, Ross, somehow it's throwing the Bible all out of proportion. That I don't, please don't misunderstand me. I'm personally not a very religious person. I was christened Russian Orthodox, so I grew up through the Old Testament, the old calendar and stuff like that with my parents. And then at one time, I have found my way to the Buddhist ideology. And okay, before I reach Nirvana, it's going to take a little while because I do smoke and I do drink. But the thing is that this information that I'm getting, this kind of throws the whole story what the Bible gives us absolutely out of proportion.
Well, there's a good answer for that, too. There really is an unbroken chain of oneness and mastery that governs all the faiths, all the religions, all the sciences. And it's said that Adam was given the ability to make the transmuting stone. And in the Bible, it does say that I shall give you a white stone. And these things are all hinting to the what we call the hidden knowledge that was possessed by some of the prophets and what we would call initiate philosophers and saints today. Mm-hmm. And that information has everything to do with the knowledge of the soul, and that the philosopher's stone, or the cinnabar, is actually a physical representation, if you will, of the soul of man. So that by using the divine cinnabar, the Taoist philosopher, which is an offshoot of Buddhism, by the way.
Yes.
The Taoist philosopher is able to ensoul his entire body. And it's said that some of the philosophers who achieve the 9 crucible cinnabar, are able to protract their natural life to many centuries, even thousands of years, through attaining a state of samadhi or a sahaj or tranquility, inner enlightenment that enables them to move on to the more refined physical world. So that these paradises, the jade gardens, the gardens of the ever young, the gardens of the immortals, they exist. They're adjacent to our world, but it's only the true Taoist philosopher or the true holy man of Islam or the true saint of Christianity that can discover these subtle paradises through adherence to the law of love and the natural process involved in introspection, worshiping God within us, and the creation of the divine cinnabar. They're all directly related. They're all one and the same. And they seem to proceed one after the other.
I have a question to that, Ross. I've been to Thailand about 25 times, and I found the Thai Buddhist ideology very, very interesting. And the temple where I always visit and spend a day or two to just come down to earth and get all that Western civilization and thoughts and problems away from me and out of my mind to clear my mind. There is a monk there that is encased in glass because he foreseen the day that he was going to die, and he went into meditation and he mummified himself. And this is, I don't know, 70, 80 years ago, and this Buddhist priest is still sitting there. Oh, okay, they put a pair of sunglasses on him because of his eyes that Jesus, I forgot the word for it. But anyway,
shrunk.
Yeah, and but the thing is that he mummified his body through meditation, and they encased him in a glass casing, where he's still sitting in that meditation position for the last 80 years, and he hasn't changed at all. You can still see the hair on his head and everything like that, and that's without any type of. Is that something? What you're saying to being that deep into that spiritual connection that you can actually go into such a state? I guess I'm hoping I'm making sense with what I'm asking.
Well, there's other documented stories on that phenomenon. Paramahansa Yogananda left himself on display for weeks in a glass coffin above ground after his passing, and he showed no sign of decay, no odor of decay. There was a philosopher on the East Coast of the United States who was a fellow at some college, and he told people, he was a philosopher of probably the initiate status. He told people that they ought to try this compound he was using because it'll preserve their bodies perfectly. And he was taking it. And to this day, I believe Jeremy is still accessible by people. And the most famous one, of course, is St. Francis Xavier, after whom Xavier University was named in Ohio. And he was I guess he was in the 1400s. He was an initiate of the Jesuits. And in those days, the Jesuits still had a lot of that secret knowledge coming from the East, from the Crusades. And he practiced something called the holy breath, which is akin to the breathing exercises the Indian yogis use. And he was able to apparently oxygenate his blood and go into a state of the breathlessness. And this is a state where you are unified with Christ by not disturbing your breath and allowing, just like a candle pulls oxygen to it without it having to go and get the oxygen. So a man can command the oxygen to come from the air and the CO2 to be pushed out by remaining in the breathless state. And this is what yogis do. And they get so charged up with oxygen that the heart doesn't need to pump very much, and it releases prana all through the body.
Wow.
This is very similar to the process of the lightning coming from the sky and the energy joining it from the earth. So the yogi goes into this high state. Well, St. Francis Xavier was sent from a pretty strong church on the west coast of Africa, northern Africa, down to Japan on missionary work. And of course, that's proselytizing. And the Japanese were still in their shogun era. So they came down. They sent this little, he was just a little fellow. He was like under 5 feet tall. Mm-hmm. And he wore his beautiful black Jesuit robe. And he was in his late 30s. Mm-hmm. And he had a black beard and black hair. And he was of such gentle demeanor and such a sweet man that he very quickly won the curiosity of the Japanese warlords and the royal houses of Japan, the emperor himself. And he was allowed to stay and teach his curious religion of the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. And as he went about speaking, miracles would happen all about him, because he knew this technique of being in grace, and therefore whatever people wished for, whatever their psychic wishes were, they would see that around him, because being in a state of grace, the natural power of the divine works through these saints and is able to bring about the wishes of those who are giving them their attention. So his name and reputation grew very quickly, mm-hmm. and he set up a small house there, and he was able to convert a number of men, especially, over to the new religion. And this was tolerated by the Japanese, because they still thought he was just a very interesting man. Mm-hmm. Well, the time came that the church up in the Vatican, it was reported that this man was doing such a good job that they wanted to send him to China to try to get the entire Chinese converted. And they thought just by sending down somebody to replace him that they could fill his shoes. Uh-huh. They didn't know that he was a secret Jesuit initiate. The Vatican wasn't initiated. It was just the Brotherhood, you know. Uh-huh. They were like, they had the knowledge of the Crusaders. So they sent another guy down, and he didn't find very much appeal. And pretty soon, I guess he was put to death. But they allowed another one to be sent down, hoping that the Japanese hoped that another one would be like the first one. Okay. Meanwhile, they sent him to China. And on his 40th birthday, or in his 40th year, he was waiting on a ship to get the go-ahead to go into China when he died.
Wow.
He went into a breathless state. And for all intents and purposes, they thought he was dead. So they informed the Chinese and the church that he had died. And while they were waiting, they took him back on to Japan, I guess. And they had permission to put him into a coffin, and they covered him with lime so that when they took his body back, it would just be a skeleton to northern Africa. And they wanted him, to be, of course, sainted. Well, a funny thing happened. A month later, they went to pull him out of the coffin, and put his bones together into a satchel. But nothing had happened to him. He was still like alive. He wasn't breathing, but his cheeks were still rosy. His eyes were still,
Wow.
still perfect. But they couldn't arouse him, and his body temperature was low, and so they just washed him off, and they put him into, or they took that coffin, and it didn't fit in the ship, so they had to, I guess, bend his knees, and they created a cut in his flesh, and some of his vital fluids leaked out. Well, they got him back to the Vatican, and they noticed that he hadn't aged in that time, and he didn't look dead, so they put him on display in a crystal sort of, coffin.
Wow.
So he's still there.
And he was there until just like a few hundred years ago. Maybe it was just 100 years ago. They had to remove him because you won't believe this. Well, you might believe it, but brothers, other monks from visiting sanctuaries,
Yes.
monasteries, would come from hundreds and hundreds of miles to pay homage to his remains, thinking that his body was connected with the body of Christ. Mm-hmm. But they would do these unsavory things, like when nobody was looking, they would bite his toe off and take the toe back to their monastery as a holy relic.
No.
And,
really?
Yeah, he was missing a lot of his toes and fingers, and I guess they were ripping out his hair. And so they had to put his body back into a safe place.
That's amazing.
Amazing stuff.
They still bring it out once every 100 years.
Yeah, that's
still hasn't decayed.
Wow.
That's amazing.
But he's all shriveled up now,
Yeah,
in any case, that's what the deep breathing and also what the cinnabar does. It keeps people in a state of grace all the time.
Wow.
So it was very desirable to be an initiate of a perfect master and do the meditation and to practice the breath. Most all of these people are vegetarian. Very few of them eat meat, habits like smoking or drinking alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting stuff that you're telling there, Ross. I mean, it's like we promised the listener. I mean, we have a man coming up who has in a lot of fields something to say. This is so interesting. But it might look as if we would digress a little bit here, which is not actually true, because I mean, when we're talking about the mounds and we're talking about megalithic sites and we're talking about energy, about life force and prana, it's a global thing, isn't it? And
yes.
all these megalithic sites are found all over the world. And sometimes it looks as if it's a grid of megalithic sites all over the earth. Maybe like Graham Hancock said in his book Fingerprints of the Gods. These sites are connected, aren't they?
Many of them are connected.
And how about now? Let's come back now to North America. You wrote this book, The Mystery of the Serpent Mound, in search of the alphabet of the gods. And this site is so amazing, and it's in Germany widely unknown still. I mean, I've heard about this site, but I never heard about all the things that you connect with it. Now, in a global scale, it looks to me as if the Serpent Mound is one of the greatest sites on Earth, I would say. It's not only a curious thing to be found there in Ohio. It's a major global holy site, isn't it?
It is. It wasn't regarded as very important until just recently, just over the last 20 years, because we began to realize that we'd never found a true north alignment. And when we found a true north alignment, compasses give incorrect readings. But when we found the north alignment astronomically, then we realized that the coils appear, and the head appears to line up with all of the classical sunrise and moonrise and moonset and sunset positions along the lunar and solar years and cycles. So the Serpent Mound very quickly became an artifact that had more astronomy associated with it than any other site in the world. So very quickly it became a little more recognizable as a true holy site.
This is so amazing. I mean, we have to tell them, these people, these coils of the snake. I mean, they have references to the sun, like the sunrise at the cardinal days, like summer solstice, which is coming up in a few weeks. Yeah, so they are like a calendar, but not only for sun, also for the moon, which is really fascinating. Some of these coils, they point at exact directions of moon ascensions at certain important dates of the calendar, right?
That's right. The lunar phases last not 1 year, but 18.6 years. 2 cycles of 9.3 years, where the moon rises and sets on the eastern horizon, just like the sun. But it does it in such a way where it doesn't do it every day. It goes through cycles where it may appear at the time of dawn or dark, or in the middle of the day or in the middle of the night on the horizon. But essentially, the cycle is similar to the solar cycle, but effectively goes through going from the extreme south setting position and south rising to the extreme north rising and setting positions. And then right in between is the midpoint rise and set positions, so that you may have on the Serpent Mound as many as 8 positions of the moon that are dictated by the position of the coils, or more. Whereas with the sun, you would specifically have, if you were using a zero altitude method of observation, in other words, if you take away the altitude and just make it sea level, you would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 definitive solar alignments with the head and the coils. And with the moon, you could have more than that or less than that, depending on your point of view.
But that's amazing, because it's, I mean, so this site has a reference to the sun, to the moon, but that's not all, because on the cover of your book, The Mystery of the Serpent Mound, even on the front cover, I mean, you show a connection between the Serpent Mound and the stars, and it's the Draco, isn't it that true? I mean,
right.
Tell us about that, please.
The constellation Draconis, the upper part of it, not the whole one we see today, but the majority of the upper asterism of Draconis fits with cunning precision to Serpent Mound, so that right at the geographic center of the serpent, these stars all point to a single star beneath the first coil from the head, the 7th coil from the tail, called Draconis Alpha, which was the pole star 5,000 years ago. So that when the phoenix dropped its wings and the serpent reverted to its form as we see today, that was marked by the occasion of the pole star, and the serpent was designed as the new phoenix worm, or the new phoenix dragon, 5,000 years ago. So that today.
So this gives us a hint of the age of the site, isn't it? It's like similar to let's say at the Giza plateau where we have the Sphinx, and the Sphinx is I mean, now we can make this with computer models. The Sphinx and the pyramids, they also mirror certain stars, and now we can find out that at the age of Leo, which is thousands of years ago, that was at that time the sun rises exactly in Leo, and the Sphinx is exactly looking for it. It sounds complicated what I'm saying, but what I'm saying is, if we use this model, we can say it's most likely that the Sphinx and the pyramidal structures were built when this calendar fits right. So can we say this at the Serpent Mound as well? And is that a tool of dating this site?
The serpent, you can say that in principle, the serpent does have embedded in it the same astrological and astronomical phenomena that were present 5,000 years ago.
Right.
About the same time the Great Pyramid was constructed, according to Baval's theory. But the Sphinx, of course, is probably twice that age because it goes back to the age of Leo.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you have the same principle, but the Serpent Mound is interesting because it projects from directly above, not from the horizon. It projects a star pattern that was at the top of the sky 5,000 years ago. Whereas if you took the Great Pyramid the same way, you would see how Draco and the pole star would be over the capstone of the Great Pyramid. Nobody's shown that yet, but there probably will be somebody that will eventually show that. In any case, the serpent and the Great Pyramid and Stonehenge all appear to be designed about the same time. I don't say constructed. I say they apparently were designed about the same time. It's interesting.
And so who were the people who built these sites? Let's say in North America, the Serpent Mound. There was also at the Serpent Mound there was a skeleton found, right? I think it was. I wrote this up somewhere. Don Dragoo was publishing that. He found a skeleton right next to the Serpent Mound. So can we say that these giants were the mound builders, and even the builders of all major megalithic sites on the planet?
It's an educated guess. But of course, you being the kind of moderators that you are, you understand that the archaeological and anthropological communities on both sides of the Atlantic don't support the idea of men of extraordinary stature or mental ability preceding us by thousands of years. Because the evidence for their physicality and the things that they did has been erased by either nature or because of the destructive tendencies of men. A good way of understanding, now I agree with you, yes, many of the men who had a hand in building some of these megalithic structures and sculptures likely knew of or were themselves men of larger build and greater capacity to understand the need for these places insofar as governing the health and well-being of the earth is concerned. So, I don't want to, I could easily digress on these points, but that's answering your question.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And that brings us just to the next. I mean, why is all this evidence that is pointing to these things? Why is this knowledge suppressed? I mean, we've just seen recently, and we talked about on this show, this Sari Hawass, the former general secretary of the antiquities in Giza. We saw him kind of in an intellectual clash versus Graham Hancock. This just happened a few weeks back. And I mean, it's the same thing. Always this alternative science of these megalithic sites is suppressed by school archaeology. And in talking about America, it seems to be even worse. I mean, wasn't it you in some show I heard you saying that the Smithsonian Institute has in its basements something like 18,000 skeletons? I mean, how come that these things are not published? I mean, why is nobody talking about this? Why is this knowledge suppressed and we kept in the state that, hey, in America these were only savages,
Yeah, the reason, and this is our research, we believe that the main reason that these artifacts, especially the skeletons, do not exist anymore, and they were found all through Africa and Europe
Yes.
in the Middle East, in the Near East. They've shown up everywhere, but the reason they don't exist anymore is because we have a morbid curiosity to put them on display or to hoard them or in some way take them out of their natural situation where they were preserved. And had we not done this, we'd still have a lot of them. A good example is the Alexandrian Library. It was probably the best stocked library. It was founded by Alexander himself, in the 4th century BCE. And Alexander had this noble ambition to bring together all the cultures of the world to Egypt and create a wonderful library, having scholars of all different languages and writings that could constantly communicate the knowledge of the world and resurrect the ancient knowledge and further ourselves as a world community. That was his vision. And what did we do? We killed Alexander. We murdered his wife. We murdered his son. We divided up his territories. And then the library was sacked by the early church. The reason the church wanted to sack the library was maybe to get control over a lot of those scrolls so that it could confine them to one scroll, which they would call later the Bible, or it was just to get control of the minds and hearts of the intelligentsia of the time. Another good example is Hitler in Germany, where you are today. Hitler's rise to power through Nazism dictated a getting rid of all the other people who had good ideas and just replace their books with our books, burn all the books. Mm-hmm. And so this has happened throughout history. The church is guilty of it. The church went into Egypt and they chiseled all the hieroglyphics off of the temples so we couldn't read them. And it wasn't until we found the Rosetta Stone in the 1700s, which had 3 different languages all saying the same thing, that we were able to understand what the Egyptians were saying. Mm-hmm. And in the United States, the native people pretty much were the owners of the property, right? Yeah. They had the rights to the property. They had lived there for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. But they didn't have gunpowder, and they didn't know how to make steel, and they couldn't sustain our germs. So we just killed them off with our germs and our technology and our guns. And it very quickly caused their villages to break up, and they had a wonderful fabric of stories that would have given us the knowledge of Manitoba, which is what I call the country that was there. Great Manitoba, Gitche Manitoba, which means the Great Spirit, the country of the risen phoenix. It was the symbol of the founding fathers. It was even the symbol of the visionaries and Hitler's Reich. The Romans held the great eagle, and the Greeks held the great phoenix to be the finest example of an animal to represent the spirit of the one, of the spirit of the great purveyor of all knowledge. And we wiped that out. The Europeans came in there and we enslaved the natives. We tortured them. We murdered them. We sent them running off to Canada, where most of them live still today. And then, as if it weren't enough, to destroy their language and to cause them to forget and to kill so many of them, then we went ahead and we just started digging up their graves. And we just couldn't leave a single one alone. Every mound got turned over. And after they turned over the mounds looking for things to sell, then they just plowed over the other ones. Some of the earthworks weren't burial places. They were the beautiful foundations for these ancient temples that I was describing. These temples that knew how to convert the energies of the earth with the sky and to promote a living paradise. And that's why, even though I get a lot of I sustain a lot of chuckles from people. I believe that the original Eden refers to this place, or a place very much like this that could have existed in Samaria or Egypt or ancient Greece. But there was one here too. I think this was the one because it was the one where the phoenix rose. Mm-hmm. Now, the funny thing about the disappearance of all this hooks into something Graham Hancock talks about. And I agree with him. And it is that we have this sort of forgetfulness, right? Mm-hmm. And he calls it spiritual amnesia or amnesia. I call it something else. I call it a loss of consciousness.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And we revert into what Jungian psychology refers to as the subconscious. As these Manitous, as these temples, which were in the United States, they were in the shape of various kinds of animals, different birds, the great serpent, bear heads, different creatures that they loved and cherished. Mm-hmm. They all had the mechanism built into them to convert the energies. And the people who lived in these various villages, each one sacred to a particular constellation of the night sky, the people ate the manna and they drank the sacred waters that were purified through the bodies of their spiritual science in their Manitous. And so the people grew to be very tall here, and they also grew to be very wise. Now, I've mentioned this before, but the thing is that as the Manitous fell into disuse, the people who had depended on them entirely began to forget what had happened. They had stories, but they couldn't remember how the Manitou worked anymore. They couldn't put it together because the masters came, the chieftains. They came and removed the precious crystal or gems that affected the reaction between earth and sky. In the United States, the Cherokee called them the Olanya Sut. Their medicine men carried them even into the 1900s. But anyway, the people began to forget. And along with their forgetting, they began to divide up and separate themselves from other tribes. And they lived on the same land, but they began to literally use the parts of the temple as food, or they would separate them and make their own private altars. And so they gradually dismantled all of their own temples. And if they ran out of materials of wood and stone, they'd go make a raid on somebody else's temple and they'd steal theirs, because all their stones and all of the earth and all of the wood that was used to make these ancient sites was holy to these people. And they gradually just used it all up for one thing or another. And I read one account where the native people went to the Octina Manitou, which is a serpent Manitou, and they gradually would pull away parts of it because they wanted the power, the sparks of living fire to come back into their life. They would grind it up. Like in India, they still grind up precious gems and they mix it with milk or water and they swallow it, and they believe this brings them good health. And that's what the native people did. They would build their beds out of them. They create their altars out of them. They make their utensils out of the and pretty soon the Manitous were gone, and then they were refurbished by a group of people that came in about 3,000 years ago, and just made of earth. So the legends were still there 3,000 years after the people lost the ability to make the medicine, which is what we call the mana or the chi, the medicine. To this day, native people, their word for medicine is translated into English as medicine. And our minds also forget, like I said, and this forgetting continues and continues, and also people begin to lose their health. and they begin to shrink in size. And in just over a period of centuries, men went from 8, 9, 10 feet tall to 7, 8, 9, then 6, 7, 8. And pretty soon, everybody was, 5, 6, 7. And by that time, the tribes who had formerly were separating themselves from each other, thinking they had, the divine thing, began to talk to each other again and arrange marriages between very tall males and very tall females who also had the robust figures. And so there was a lot of inbreeding in the royal classes of the heads of villages. Just like in Europe, the European royalty, the Germans are inbred with the English, and the Italians inbred with the Germans, and the Germans inbred with the Czechoslovakians. And, I don't know if that actually happened, but, these things, and pretty soon you have a lot of inbreeding, and there are some diseases occur. And like hemophilia, I think, is one of them. And, and these people, they were able to maintain their blood stock. And so they had village heads that stood 7, 7.5 feet high. And these are the skeletons, thousands of years after the giants were here. These are the children's of the children of the children of the children's children of the original gods, or godlike people that lived here. And they were in Europe and Egypt and in Greece. Those legends we hear, Zeus, Apollo, Hermes, Poseidon. And in Germany, you have the Teutonic lore. You have Odin and Hermod and Balder and just these beautiful stories. And these are all passed down to us from very possibly actual events when we were on a much higher level of knowledge about stewarding the earth. So it all boils down to that. We forget, and that's why the skeletons are missing.
All right.
And that's why,
I get this. I mean, I see. I mean, we forget a lot. That's obviously the case. I mean, we've lost a lot of natural connections to the earth, to the skies, to these temples, to the cultures. I see that, but still, it looks to me as if it's actively also suppressed, this knowledge. I mean, you're talking about this project of Phoenix Rising. And I mean, it looks to me as if there are some forces here that don't want to see that happening. I mean, I can understand when the white man colonized America just to justify for themselves this land robbery. You say, hey, come on, there were no people, there was no culture, there were only savages. Or like the Spaniards did the same thing when they came to Central America. I mean, they were destroying the culture. They were burning everything they found. They were destroying temples. They were destroying the culture. It's like the cultural genocide goes along hand in hand with this land robbery. We've seen this stuff also in Europe. I mean, at the time when Christianity came and wiped out pagan culture, I mean, we saw this also happening right here in Saxony, where we broadcast right now. I mean, the holy sites were vandalized. They were just destroyed, and then afterwards you build a chapel on it, or a monastery, or a church. So it's sort of a cultural genocide. I can understand this also. It's happening in history quite often. But nowadays, I mean, why are now why is evidence suppressed? Not only in America, I mean, again, why is the Smithsonian Institute holding back these evidences? Why aren't children not taught that? Why is it like we brought this up in Europe, in Sardinia? There was people telling me that there were giant bones where skeletons were found, and then the archaeologist experts from Rome, from big universities came, and they took it all away. And some people in Sardinia even eyewitnessed that they were destroying skeletons right on the place. I mean, what kind of science is that? And why are these things happening? Is there something dark going on in order to suppress the rejuvenation of life force, of this life energy, and just to throw it in? I mean, even the strange phenomena of the chemtrails, of the graying of the skies, I mean, it might also play into that, just because this is also to do to disconnect human beings from light, and in this case from cosmic energy. So is there something going on that is actively suppressing this consciousness, this natural consciousness, this phoenix rising, as you call it?
Yes.
There's an agenda going on, isn't it?
Yeah, just before the phoenix rises, there is an extraordinary amount of darkness and confusion among the people. It hits every income level. It hits every religious belief. It hits every nation, every language group. Everybody's unhappy. Nobody has it good anymore. You know, even the very wealthy and the rich, they're afraid that they're going to be attacked and overthrown by the people. And this confusion continues until very clear, it becomes very clear that this must be done. The phoenix must rise in order to restore some order, some semblance of health and unanimity to the planet and the people. Now, the solution that the phoenix rising brings is simplistic, and perhaps it's a little too simplistic for people who only see answers based upon the spending of money and the running through of academic culture. In other words, the putting before committees in order to have a decisive understanding or a policy-making understanding of something. But this has to be overcome. We have to understand that if something makes sense and something feels right, well, it is right, and it does make sense. And if you can do it from your own home without taxing anybody else, you know, like solar energy, that's a good idea because everybody can do it. But there are forces at work that don't want you to do solar because they have you hooked up to the electrical system that burns coal. Right. You know, that's the way it is here. They don't want people to, they suppress solar. They don't want the streets to be paved in solar panels because they'd be out of business. And so all the money they make that we're giving them, they lobby the Congress or the body makers, the lawmakers of the body, of the politic here, and they make it illegal to use anything but their system until it becomes much clearer if their technology works. And so we get this kind of darkness, this kind of greed, and the same thing happens on the banking level, which I'm sure you're familiar with. We see the bankers loaning us money that they don't have.
Yeah.
They don't have it, but they give it to us, and they make us pay them everything back, plus a hefty interest, and they're just laughing at us because we're too stupid to see the trick they're playing on us. But what can we do? You know, we're too poor now, most of us, to fight that. And so it continues. They like the idea of running the masses, and they don't want to give that up. So there's a sinister side to it. But anyone that sees the logic in transforming the earth by means of this, the only word you can think of by our science is a magical reinstatement of life. Anyone that can see the practicality in that will go for it. And besides, the masters are sending a number of spokesmen who will all have the ability to persuade through charisma that this is a practical course for us to pursue.
Then another thing I want to ask is might there also be religions or ideologies involved in this agenda of suppressing stuff? I mean, as I understand it, in North America there are foundings of pieces of stones that have Egyptian hieroglyphs on on it. There are ancient Phoenician writings found in America, or some ancient Hebrew stuff. Then there comes in the story of the Mormons. Just also for the listeners, maybe the Mormons, they were founded by Adam Smith in 18 something, and this guy claims that he had this dream, and in this dream an archangel spoke to him and told him, "Hey, Adam, you next day you go to a certain spot at a mountain and you start digging and you're gonna find something." And he did. And what did he find? Some golden plates with an unknown ancient writing on it, which became then the Book of Mormon. So as I understand it, it's also the Mormons are very strong right now in America. I mean, this is a big group, and they are very much into getting a hand on all these evidences that are found in America. And I also wonder, why is that? I mean, how does this religious stuff come into the talk here? Yeah? It's is it even a possibility that maybe the ancient American people, the giants, or let's say it like that, might they have even a connection to the Old Testament? Might they be something like one of the 12 lost tribes, or maybe even some other people that is mentioned in the Old Testament, like the Canaanites? Because out of this ideology, it seems to me that many Americans, I think it's safe to say for the Mormons, out of this they also get some sort of racial thing out of it. They're saying these Indian people, the native people, they are not good. They are somehow dark. They were always, and they are kind of an enemy that we have to fight against. And by that, the culture is destroyed. What's your take on that? On all this stuff?
Well, it's kind of controversial.
It is, man.
To discuss the Mormon Church and Mormonism. They took over the state of Utah. Basically, it's their state, and they honestly settled it, and they set up legitimate businesses, and they're a very good people in general. There's a lot of controversy over the origin of their Book of Mormon, and I don't want to really comment on it because I've seen information pro and con. But what I do like about the Mormons is that they like me.
They like what you're doing, yeah.
And I like their healthy attitude towards life, and the fact that in spite of the fact that many people don't believe what they believe, they have persevered, and they have non-violently persevered in their work, and they haven't tried to really proselytize or over proselytize. I mean, everybody tries to proselytize to a certain degree, and they're very polite people. And I compare them in some respects to the Amish, although they're a little more worldly than the Amish, who, by the way, came from Germany a long time ago,
right? And
they still live around here too.
Well, Ohio is actually, I think, has the largest Amish population in the United States, or because I know in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, there's also a very large population of Amish people. But I understood that Ohio, right outside of Medina, or Medina, I guess they call it, right south of it, there's a very large, if not the largest, Amish population in the United States.
Yeah, we have a good, strong, and I've spoken to their men. They've asked me to speak because they wanted to know about the giants.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but anyway, as far as the prehistory and the history, and the purported history that's as proposed by the Mormons, they have a timeline that seems to be relative to the Adena timeline when the earthworks were being preserved. There are reported instances of, and this comes through native legend, not through Mormon legend, but through native legend, they say that there have been white visitors here. I've seen 2 or 3 accounts of them. And they say that they had abilities. I think they had the ability to work with fire, probably a forge of some sort, that the native people didn't have, and they wouldn't share it with the native people, and that they were enemies because of it. And eventually the native people banded together and they massacred these people near Louisville, Kentucky. And it was they were very sad to have done it. And then there's also supposed to have been some colonies started in Roanoke and so forth, where white people just disappeared. They didn't know where they went to. But among the Mandan, there were people that had the characteristics of Caucasian people, but there hasn't been any studies done on the Mandan specifically. So all we're left with is some legend, and then the modern legend of the Mormons. So it's really hard to relate of the Phoenix last rising, which is 7,000 years ago, to events that occurred as late as 3,000 years ago. Of course, the Mormons themselves didn't get here until white people got here. But I will say one thing. There have been some very mysterious artifacts that contain Hebraic symbology, at least 3 instances of it, especially one that was discovered by George Morehouse back in New Mexico, that was proclaimed to be actually the Ten Commandments, and it was pretty old, but it wasn't produced by Europeans, that have all been sort of treated separately and not brought together under one shield or aegis, and therefore having been the Jews being here before everybody else has not been given any credibility by academics.
But do you think that there were in ancient times much more connections between America and, let's say, the old ancient world? There's also this case, it's already a few years out, I guess, that in some Egyptian graves they found traces of coca, of the coca plant, and also of the tobacco plant, which were definitely coming from America at that time. So that just stands as a proof that there were somehow connections. We've got Thor Heyerdahl, also now in modern times. This man he's living in he's coming from our hometown where we are broadcasting now, Chemnitz. A man called Dominic Görlitz, who also built similar like Thor Heyerdahl, a boat just like the people build the boats at the Titicaca Lake, only with schilf.
With
grass, water grass,
yeah.
And with this guy, he was crossing the Atlantic and stuff. Quite interesting. I mean, were there must have been quite big contacts between these continents, and is it even possible that the Native Americans that they came somehow from this ancient world, and that there are some memories reverberating also in these Mormon legends, because they talk about this stuff, don't they?
Right. Well, the Mormons would have picked their stuff up from internal sources. They weren't here, as far as we know. There's no evidence that there was any basis for advocating what is the stories in the Mormon book, the Book of Mormon. But nevertheless, a lot of what they have to say is intriguing, because they seem to touch on the truth, which I do think came from their spiritual source more than their external sources. I apologize to anyone listening who doesn't agree, but I think the Mormons are more practical in a spiritual sense than they are externally. The fact that there was trade between North America, South America, and North America, Europe, and South America, Egypt, and Africa is almost an established fact now.
Right.
It's not just the tobacco and the cocoa, but especially tobacco, but there's corn involved, and there in Michigan, the largest deposit of copper, I think, ever found in the world, which is right on the surface practically, was mined for quite a long time, and nobody knows where the copper went. I mean, there was millions of pounds, just much tonnage, hundreds and maybe thousands of tons of pure copper was removed from Michigan, Upper Peninsula, who knows where. Perhaps it was smelted and taken to Egypt, and because the Isle of Cyprus didn't produce enough for their needs. It was the one metal that could be manipulated more easily without the use of fire, because even in ancient Egypt, they weren't very good at smelting things yet. And of course, native people, as they were discovered here in the United States by the Europeans, couldn't melt copper. They didn't have fire or the wheel. But the legends of the native people suggest that they were excellent copper smiths, perhaps even ironsmiths, because of artifacts that were found.
That's what I was saying before, is where they're finding hammers and stuff like that, and all these things. And to that time, the only thing that pops into my head at the moment is that Darwin must be turning in his grave.
Yeah, with the tall people, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, because through the Darwin evolution theory, there's always that missing link that has never been found. And the thing is that we're discovering things that nobody really talked about before, and it's just it's exposing a completely different picture on what he has brought to schools and what we're learning.
Darwin was a naturalist, and he was also a bit of an animist. He wasn't particularly strong with his belief in Christianity because he was a scientist. Animists are people that believe that there's some inherent power that animates things. Like the entire Shinto faith is based in animism, that we have souls that are immortal, and that these souls inhabit the higher life forms, and even many of the lower life forms, if not in a different way than when we developing more ego. But for the most part, he believed, we're talking about Darwin, he believed that there was a natural order to things that in some way dictated the way things would prosper and carry on their lineages. And that was a good premise to start with. And I think it should have rested at that, but it didn't. It took on many different forms. It was applied socially to make black, Negro people and indigenous people inferior to people that had better technology. It made people that normally would believe in science more skeptical if science is going to be used in a way that abused people. And it created a rift in various ways that people think of what we now call evolution. Of course, we've expanded the term evolution, but in Darwin's day, and in strictly Darwinian terms, there have never been giants, except Gigantopithecus, who was a great ape that they have found the bones of. But when we look to find giant human bones, they may be found, but they'll immediately be coveted and sold for a lot of money. And most of this happened during the 1700s and the 1800s. Now, Don Dragoo and 2 or 3 other really good archaeologists in the Ohio region, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Ohio, did discover some in the 20th century, some very tall skeletons. But they are ignored, even though their work is published and still in print, by the reigning academics. So when you're talking to people like Darwinists or people who believe that man is not essentially divine, he is an animal. You're talking to people that have a limited scope of knowledge.
Yeah.
And what they believe in may be filled with the fire and the life of their belief, and it may convince many people. But if we were to meet Adam and Eve, if we were to sit in the same room, which would have to have a very tall ceiling, if we were to have a sit down and interview them for the camera, we'd see that they were very gentle, very kind, very intelligent people that were enabled to inspire us that we were not animals. And that when men perfect themselves, when they achieve the opening of the third eye and they can begin to see through all the veils of etheric matter into the astral, into the causal, even back to the nature of the creator, of the creation, past the Big Bang, all the things that we conceive of now in our limited intellectual capacities, they would be able to instill in us the fact that we are in the shape of the great or the grand universe or the omniverse, which we hear from holy men in India, those who have learned to rise above, that is in the shape of a grand man, Kal, the great timekeeper. And Kal is encased or held in a giant egg, the egg of the all-knowing Brahma. And that there are more than one of these, but we live within one, our great universe with all of its different levels, its heavens, and its fields of wisdom and knowledge, and lands of eternal bliss, and hells. There's a few hells in the lower part of our realm. And then the mortal worlds where we don't know what's going on. All these planes, they're all part of this grand figure that is kind of remade for us in the form of the phoenix that rises once every 7,000 years. And so what Adam would tell us, and what Eve would assuredly back him up, is that grow up, become mature, restore your inner vision, and perceive the seed of truth. And that is that we're not animals. We did not evolve out of the muck and the slime. If anything, as Helena Blavatsky once said, animals came from us.
Yeah, right.
We didn't come from them.
Okay.
And when we forget, though, when we go through the forgetful cycle, it appears as though, since we're diminishing, that we evolved out of amoeba. But I mean, in less than 1 billion years, to go from how did it start? Because our most brilliant scientists today still can't tell you where life came from.
Yeah.
They can't figure that one out. That's because life comes from the soul, comes from the spirit, and it's transferred into the nerves and the skull of the individual. Mm-hmm. So it isn't until and Saint Augustine, I'm sorry. So I combined Valentine with Augustus, sue me, Saint Augustine, who was a very smart guy, told us that the soul, that blessed drop of divine balance comes into the body of the infant just before the infant comes out of the womb. We don't waste our time and our precious energy in going through 9 months of heat and sweat. We are divine creatures, so to speak.
Right, exactly.
And we do not inhabit the form because we are noble compared to the flesh. We give the flesh divinity.
Good to hear these words, Ross. Good to hear these words.
So, Ross, would you say that it's? I gotta ask this. I have my personal opinion about it. I don't believe that life, as we know it, ends here in a 6-foot hole. I believe that the energy from our soul actually goes into another dimension. Do you have any thoughts on that, or any opinions or something like that? That is when our life ends here on this planet, that it's over.
Yeah, I could give you. I learned this from the Indian masters.
Okay.
This is very interesting. There are a number of bodies, and St. Paul even referred to it in his Corinthians. He said there are bodies celestial and bodies terrestrial, and they don't know about each other, basically, is what he said. And we know very little about the other. But according to the teachings of the masters, we are, the soul, the pure spirit, an immortal spark made in the image of the One. And in some way, we're given birth to by the Absolute, in the image of the Absolute. And then we go out into the creation and we inhabit various forms, and in this way we grow in wisdom and knowledge of matter and spirit in combination. And every time we have a life, we gain a little bit of substantiality to our spirit, which gives us what we call soul. Mm-hmm. So if you have soul, it means you're an old spirit and you've inhabited many bodies. So you have the spirit, and then you have something called the Atman. And the Atman is what we refer to as a body or a series of very, very subtle bodies that are before the material creation. And this is what Atman comes out of, if I even have words for it. But there are 3 realms above the 5 realms, and they are the realm of the sons of God, where you're just a pure soul. You just radiate in freedom, which is supposed to be indescribably wonderful. And then you have the realm of the eternal patience, which is like where the female souls like to go. So to speak, it's gentler than the sons of God. And then above that, you have the realm of eternal perfect love. But in the physical world, we're in the realm of the flesh body, and they call that the Annamaya Sharira, or Kosha. Mm-hmm. Annamaya Kosha means the body from which we derive nourishment. Anna means nourishment. Maya is from the sense of the external, the illusion. Mm-hmm. Annamaya Kosha nourishes a body internal to it that in Germany they call the doppelganger, I think. But the Theosophists refer to it as the etheric double. It's also known as the ghost body, the body that lives on just after the physical body dies. Mm-hmm. It's in the shape of the physical body, but it's hyperphysical. It can pass through physical matter pretty easily, but it still has some trouble doing that. It would prefer to use an open doorway if a ghost came in your house, for example. Okay. He would prefer to use an open doorway, but he could come through the wall if he had to. Mm-hmm. This body is the body that's nourished by the Annamaya Kosha. Okay. So in our bodies, we're like the chrysalis around the butterfly that is the Pranamaya Kosha, the etheric double. So you have Annamaya Kosha, nourishes for 70, 80 years the Pranamaya Kosha, and then the Pranamaya Kosha becomes fully nourished with the life force essence gotten from our digesting food here in this world. So it behooves us to eat good food, and that way we can create a really sweet afterlife body for ourselves. Mm-hmm. Now, that afterlife body went out of comprehension for most people over 2,000 years ago. It was pretty much common knowledge that we would have a vehicle, a light vehicle, to step into, so to speak, after our physical body got too old or too diseased and dropped off. We actually forgot that we had the Pranamaya Kosha to inhabit and move on. It has its own land, its own orchards, its own towns, its own friends, Another world awaits the pranamaya kosha, but we can't see that world. It's a world that's too subtle for physical eyes that have forgotten that they are souls. Mm-hmm. So we're in a sad state right now. This is why the phoenix rises once every 7,000 years. Now, the pranamaya kosha also has a limited number of breaths. And it has a body internal to it that's called the mana or manamaya kosha. And it's a beautiful body. They say that Jinavatar Babaji, the immortal that Yogananda talks about in India, he inhabits that body a lot because he teaches in not just the earth where we are, but he can teach in the paradisiacal realm where the pranamaya kosha people are, the paradises that are all around the earth. And then he can also go into the higher astral and do his teachings there. Some say he's Christ-like and go beyond too, but that's way beyond our knowledge. In any case, it's possible for a human being like us to have access to the physical, the hyperphysical, and the astral body, where most people go after they die because they don't have knowledge of the pranamaya kosha anymore. So what happens to a person is they die. Generally, they're taken to a funeral home, and they're either cremated, and which is advisable to set free your pranamaya kosha, or they're embalmed, and the pranamaya kosha, which still has the soul attached to it, yearns to get back into it. So they put these preservatives in it, and they try to discourage. And nowadays, there are these halfway houses that are established in most of the major cities around the world. And they take in, there's a class of people that we call, not the jinn, but I'm coming up short here.
No, that's
Fae people.
Okay.
F-A-E, what we call Fae people. And they serve as intermissionaries to help people who release their subtle pranamaya kosha. And they help them out, and they offer them food if they want to live in the paradise world. But in many cases, because the people have no knowledge of that, they're not even really conscious that they're being helped. And they just yearn to be alive again in the physical world and miss their family and friends. And then within 2 weeks to no more than a month, they starve to death. But the really lucky ones, the ones that, want to do it the old-fashioned way, they'll be very aware that there are Fae people around that are offering help, and they'll eat food that's offered them, grapes, whatever it is that's easy on your digestive tract. And it's food that's grown in the etheric world, so it's made for the etheric body, which should be, well made if you conducted yourself well in the physical world.
Wow. Okay,
somebody's asking, why is this system set up? Well, it's because we're immortal, and we like to set up very elaborate, long-term series of lives in order to go from worst to first, in order to experience the lowest state of consciousness up to the highest. And, there wasn't much in the beginning. It is said that most souls started out as lower forms. So in a way, there is an evolution. And in order to get your first appointment to the human form, you would have to inhabit many lower forms. But man was first. The lower forms are part of the idea that came from the gods. And that's why you see in the Greek mythologies and so forth, how such and such a divine created this animal or that animal. And Adam named all the animals, You see this kind of story passed down to us as myth, whereas it was once legend, it was once readily believable, although it couldn't be proved anymore.
Okay. Wow.
That's amazing.
But, I have to tell you, Russ, I think I'm going to be laying in my bed tonight, and I'm going to be sitting there with eyes open and letting all this stuff just go through my head. what we talked about, because so much information. And naturally, it wound up my my generator to definitely go through all your books. Star Mounds, Legacy of a Native American Mystery. Then you have the mystery of the Serpent Mound. In Search of the Alphabet of the Gods. Then you have also the Ancient Giants Who Ruled America, the Missing Skeletons, and the Great... sorry, okay, that was...
Traditions of
Traditions
Giants. That
of
was your
Giants,
book.
yeah.
Traditions of Giants, right?
Yeah, that book you mentioned was written by a guy who basically plagiarized me.
Okay.
But I don't really fault him. I fault his publisher. I told his publisher, look, he's using a lot of my material.
Okay.
He's even using word for word. But I kind of like the guy. He did a lot of his own research, so that's not a bad reference. But my book, Tradition of Giants, is available for free at academia.edu.
Okay.
You can download it as a PDF.
Okay.
Let's say
Ross
that again,
Hamilton.
so we can put this also up maybe on our page.
We're going to put
link
up all the
that.
links, so if you,
So
for sure.
because that's a good thing. People can download that for free. Is that what you're saying?
That's right.
Right. So please say it again. This
the
so
website
we can write it
where
down.
you can get the PDF one more time, Ross, please.
Oh, yeah, it's academia.edu.
Academia.edu.
Right. And just type in my name.
Okay.
And
right.
people can also find you on Facebook. So as we did.
Yeah. Facebook, I'll accept anybody as long as they're not trying to sell something or they're prostituting themselves. Recently, I had to unfriend two guys that had just friended me so they could sell stuff on their site.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, that's
So
modern times.
but I'll accept anybody as long as your intentions are good. You can be my friend on Facebook, and I'll answer questions that you have. Also, my books are available through the website. They're on Amazon.
Yes, sir.
Under Ross Hamilton, Amazon Books.
Mhm.
And you can also get some of my books that are not on Amazon at ancientamerican.com. That's the Ancient American Magazine book page. And you can order it directly.
American, okay.
Their Ancient American Magazine.
Okay.
Very interesting. Say Ross, we've been talking so much about these power places, and you live in Ohio. You're not so far away, I guess, from many of these places, and the Serpent Mound in particular. Now, just a few weeks ahead, we've got the summer solstice coming up. Do people like you or other people, do you make any connections really with this place? I mean, is there any kind of rituals going on? Are people gathering there to celebrate this? Or is it just like a museum with a fence around and you can't do these things?
Yeah, we have a pretty enviable summer solstice celebration. This year it'll be held at the Soaring Eagle Retreat. Just directly, it's actually part of the Serpent Mound complex. It's on the property right next door to the Serpent. You can walk to it, and we're hoping for many hundreds, maybe thousands of people to show up again this year. We have a number of speakers. I'll be speaking myself, but we also have some really good people coming in to talk about the archaeoastronomy and various other aspects of the ancient lores. And it's just a good time. We have many booths, and you really can watch the actual sun rise and set on the serpent's various parts by coming to the park at dawn and staying until dark.
Wow.
On the 21st.
That's great.
20th, 21st, 22nd, you can see the same phenomenon because the sun sort of stands still for 3 days.
Well, we're definitely gonna keep in touch, Ross, and I'm following you anyway, and we will as a show we're gonna follow you on Facebook. So maybe if you post some of the stuff what is going on there, also with the summer solstice and stuff, we're from time to time we will connect this stuff into our site as well. If that's okay for you.
Good. That's good.
What I would like to ask Ross as a closing question, because we've had this gentleman almost 2.5 hours on the radio. Ross, if you could say something to the world out there on how, well, maybe this will be a lot easier. If you could say in a short sentence or whatever it is, 2 sentences, what you would like to see from humanity happen, or to the people out there, some kind of tip on a way to follow, what would it be?
I say,
it's a hard, tough question, actually. Yeah.
Well, it is. Well, I mean, Russ
but
has a lot of expertise, a lot of intelligence. He
Right.
knows so many things, and he's got a very spiritual soul and stuff like that. And I really do believe that these people like Ross have something to say to the world out there, and that's why I'm asking Ross this question. It might be difficult.
I do have something to say, and I will say it. That is, learn to see inside yourself. Learn to reverse your attention back to the seat of the soul behind the eyes where the optic nerves meet. There is an organ of vision there that is not working in all of us. I don't care if you call yourselves the Illuminati or if you're the Pope. That eye is dormant in us, and it must be restored. Get initiation from a competent living master that does not charge you any money, preferably from someone from India that is of good repute, and begin to reverse your attention, because the light is coming. And for those who can't see it within themselves, it will burn you on the outside. I mean,
Strong
it
words.
will burn you.
Strong words.
indeed.
Strong words.
So for me also, let me also put in, it just fits in there, and also like a closing question from my side. You've been talking a lot about this Phoenix Rising project and about these 7,000 year cycles. Are we now on one of those turning points? I mean, is this really something that is happening now or just ahead? Is this
Yes.
Also maybe similar like what Jose Arguelles and the Maya calendar and all this stuff was saying?
Yes.
We are at this point now, right?
Yes, the master power has decided to align with the belief that 2012, which we are taught from the Mayans mainly, and of course most astronomers agree, including even Anthony Ameni, who is like the chief of astronomy, I think, in the Western Hemisphere here sometimes, that 2012 is a year that starts the new precessionary cycle and is therefore a good time to consider the beginning of a new age. I'm not saying the new age, I'm saying a new age that, observing the Phoenix Rising from the year 2012, and it's already started to form, I would say that in less than 300 years, there will be very tall, very healthy, and spiritually wise and awakened people all over the earth, much more so than we see today. And that we can look forward to the return of the gods. The return, if you want to call them giants, you can call them that, but they're really man the way man is supposed to be. You know, people are supposed to be very tall, very healthy, and all of their vestigial aspects, all of the organs that don't work, all of the DNA that's in recess, all of it comes back to form the grand man that we, in the old days, would have referenced as a Zeus. But in modern times, we think of him as Jesus or a Buddha. But think of Jesus or Buddha with all of his powers and his great stature and his kindness and gentleness and power restored. I mean, it would be like Super Christ. Well, we're expecting something along the order of Maitreya Buddha, the super Christ, to return and bring peace to the entire world.
Wow. There you go.
There we go.
Ladies
man.
and gentlemen, Mr.
Amazing.
Ross Hamilton, direct from Ohio, with us tonight. And Ross, I can't thank you enough for the time you took for us, especially here in Germany, to speak on your books and your subjects and your expertise on the studies that you have made. And wow, you blew me away.
Yeah. It was very inspiring, and the good news is that we recorded this entire session. We will upload it in the next days. I will send you a link, so you might use it for your own stuff. But also for all the listeners out there, we can listen to this over and over again and get to digest all this information, because it's amazing that all these things that you brought up in the last couple and a half hours. It's powerful, yeah. And also from my side, thanks a lot, Ross, for taking your time and sharing your energy and your wisdom with us.
Gentlemen, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, maybe at some other day in the future we will continue our talk, because I mean there's still so much more that
No, I'm sure that Ross
do,
also has a couple of books in the oven.
Yeah, exactly. Are you
books
working on new
the
stuff?
Oven, or?
Right.
Yes.
Good question, man.
The Nazca Mysteries is my next book.
The Nazca Mysteries, yeah, South America, yeah, Central America, actually, yeah.
I believe that all the Nazca pictures are actually part of a beautiful mosaic, that when you put them all together in a certain way, they tell a story.
Wow,
My
excellent.
publisher's looking at that right now.
Well, Ross, let us know when you're ready
Absolutely.
with this one, and
Absolutely.
we'll be happy to have you again on our show and to help spread this information here in Germany.
All right, man, I must be off.
Ross, thanks very much. Round of applause, and we're wishing you a great rest of the week and naturally a wonderful evening. And we'll be talking to you soon. No, we'll be in
Okay.
touch. Okay, Mr. Ross Hamilton, ladies and gentlemen. Bye bye now.
Ciao.
So. Oh man,
nur durchschnaufen,
yeah,
oder?
wow, I tell you, that was definitely intense.
Hammer. Müssen wir auf jeden Fall jetzt erstmal unbedingt irgendein Musikstück.
Ja, das habe ich mal am
und
Start.
dann,
Wir machen mal
das
hier
sacken
kurz
lassen,
eine
ne?
Pause und legen los mal mit ein bisschen Musik und wir kommen mal gleich zurück. Wir haben 23:36 mittlerweile an diesem Mittwoch. Das ist mal fast Ende der Show. So, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Euch mal natürlich auch paar Worte mal kurz mal darüber, was wir jetzt gerade gesprochen haben, zu verdauen und vielleicht mal in Deutsch mal ein bisschen zu erklären. Frankie, hilft mir dabei. Und
Ich hab die ganze Zeit mitgeschrieben hier.
Ja, genau. Und wir kommen mal gleich zurück. Erstmal ein bisschen Musik von Adema. Das ist der Stiefbruder von Jonathan Davis. From the band Korn.
Wollen wir
mit
nicht so ein
seiner Band.
Indianer-Ding spielen?
Können wir machen.
Komm,
Machen
ich
wir
schmeiß
mal
mal noch
gleich.
rein hier. Habe ich extra mitgebracht heute.
Welcher? Diese Morley Loon?
Lass mal sehen, warte mal, hier, Chan wäre gut, oder ziehen wir nochmal ganz runter hier. Machen wir von Willie Trasher Spirit Child.
Okay,
Yeah, that's my favorite.
gut. Und dann danach kriegst du Adema. Bis gleich. Ciao.
Roger House war das hier mit dem Beaverman Song, auch nochmal aus dem Album hier, Sweetgrass Festival. Schöne Indianermusik hier, nochmal zum Ausklang von unserer Sendung. Und Mensch, Alex, ey, wir sind immer noch hier hin und weg, oder? War ich da?
Ja,
war
das
schon
war
ganz erstaunlich,
wirklich-
was wir heute Abend erlebt haben.
Ja, das, die einzige, was ich mir immer so ein bisschen Gedanken gemacht habe, ist, dass vielleicht manche von den Worten, was Ross benutzt hat, eventuell für manche Deutsche mal schwer zu verstehen gewesen wäre. Da du als Deutscher eine bessere Wortschatz hast als ich, in allgemein, kann man das mal zusammenfassen, was wir darüber gesprochen haben? Das ist ein bisschen schwer, wa?
Boah, ey, ganz ehrlich, also jetzt so zusammenzufassen in 1, 2 Sätzen fällt mir auch schwer. Ich meine, also ich konnte ihm sehr gut folgen. Ich hoffe, es war für die meisten Zuhörer auch möglich. Ist natürlich schwierig mit der Sprachbarriere. Aber andererseits, Leute, weißt du, wir finden in Deutschland niemanden, der diese Dinge erzählen kann.
Ja,
Da gibt's einfach keinen. Oder zumindest weiß ich niemanden. Ich meine, wenn ihr Leute kennt, ja, die eventuell vielleicht auch interessant sein könnten für unser Studiogast, ja, nur ran. Ja, gebt uns Kontakt hier, schreibt uns und teilt uns das mit und wir werden dann mal solche Leute einladen. Aber es geht halt nicht anders. Ich meine, wenn wir diese Informationen wollen, müssen wir so ein bisschen über den Tellerrand gucken. Aber,
Ja, genau.
aber ich denke, er hat insgesamt ja auch eher ruhig gesprochen und auch nicht so schnell, so wie wir immer. Ja. Wir hauen ja immer so, wir überholen uns ja dann oft selber so. Ja. Er hat ja ganz cool gesprochen, ganz ruhig.
Ja.
Und ich denke, man konnte schon das Wichtigste verstehen. Ich kann es nicht so kurz zusammenfassen, aber was ich auf jeden Fall machen werde, ich meine, ich werde mir das Ganze nochmal anhören, in Ruhe auch nochmal. Und vielleicht können wir ja nächste Woche dann auch nochmal beide
Kurz mal darüber so eine...
bisschen plaudern, mal so reflektieren, oder? Alex?
Ja.
Ich meine, du hast
Ja.
das ja auch nochmal an und dann können wir da vielleicht nochmal die wichtigsten Punkte auch nochmal in Deutsch sagen, was er gesagt hat.
Absolutely.
Weil
Aber-
es sind einige echt erstaunliche Dinge so, die er da gebracht hat, ja. Über das amerikanische Thema, aber auch dann überhaupt übers Leben, über dieses Phänomen Leben,
Ja.
was Leben überhaupt bedeutet. Und ich meine, das sind natürlich die großen Fragen, ja.
Ja, und man hat auch mal diese ganze indische Worte, das ja zum Beispiel der dritte Augen, das ist das Chakra in des Menschen, ne? Eigentlich, was er spricht, wa?
Ja, also Chakren gibt's natürlich mehrere, da könnte man auch noch viel machen.
Ja, aber das ist der dritte Auge. Oder
Das dritte Auge ist eins der Chakren, genau.
Ja,
by the way, bei den Chakren, weil ich meine, das hat er heute gar nicht erwähnt, aber es ist auch so man spricht ja von 7 Chakren, die der Mensch
Ja,
hat.
genau.
Wir kommen immer wieder auf die Zahl 7.
Das
by the way, ja.
das Halschakra, das dritte Auge und das sind auch ein paar andere. Ich glaube, das ist irgendwie.
Ja, es geht von ganz oben, vom Kronenchakra bis runter zum Steißbein. Ja. Also es sind
genau.
sieben entlang der Wirbelsäule, 7 Chakren. Und ich meine, da könnte man so lange drüber reden. Warum die Zahl 7? Ja, das ist genau die gleiche Zahl, die auftaucht bei dem 7000-Jahres-Zyklus, den er beschrieben hat.
Ja.
Auch ein Thema, wo ich gerne mit ihm nochmal genauer wüsste, wie kommt er auf diese 7000? Ich meine, das ist sehr interessant. Aber diese 7 Chakren, gibt's auch eine Übereinstimmung zu diesem Serpent Mount wiederum. Weil der hat 7 Kurven.
Ja,
Und du kannst
das ist, was ich meine.
Du kannst es verbinden mit den Chakren und dann auch wieder mit den Grundtönen und so weiter. Ich meine, das ist freaky stuff.
Ja, und siehst
dieser
du, wir haben
Serpent
auch
Mount ist
über
genial,
Tonen und Musik
Ja.
und die Frequenzen mal gesprochen.
Richtig.
Und sowas. Und da kannst du mal sehen, das hat alles irgendwie eine Verbindung. Das ist das erste Mal, dass wir mit ihm gesprochen haben. Und man merkt, dass da sind irgendwo Verbindungen.
Auf jeden Fall. Ich meine, einige von den Themen haben wir eben auch schon angesprochen. Auch Funktionen von Tempeln und Sound. Und ich meine, es ist so viel. Ja, das ist einfach großartig, das jetzt mal eben von jemand ganz anders zu hören und ganz viel Input, den er da heute angebracht hat. Richtig cool. Ja.
Ja.
Ich hoffe, euch hat das echt genauso inspirieren können. Und wie gesagt, wenn man auch nicht alles verstanden hat, wir werden es wieder hochladen, die Sendung, und dann kann sich jeder nochmal in Ruhe anhören. Und alles in allem sage ich auch, ey, wir kommen da nicht drum rum. Im Interzeitalter, wir können nicht nur in unserer eigenen Sprache hängen. Ganz ehrlich, Englisch ist wichtig. Mir persönlich, ich würde ja sogar gerne richtig Russisch können zum Beispiel. Ich würde gerne Russisch können, um all diese Internet-Connections in Russisch auch mal zu verstehen. Das kann ich leider nicht. Ja,
это для меня без проблем.
Da gibt's so viel Zeug und da sind wir noch völlig außen vor, aber so,
Ich
dass
kann mit denen reden.
müssen den Horizont halt erweitern, ja, auch sprachlich, ja, und Russisch wäre cool. Das
Ja,
würde ich mir wünschen, ja.
also wir könnten mal mit einer Russe sprechen und dann übersetze ich das alles.
Ich meine, es ist einfach nur für mich
Ihr
so zur
habt
Recherche
gesagt,
so.
dass
Ja,
dies
genau.
nichts gut machen, diese.
So eine Show dann werden wir. Alex als Synchronübersetzer, so.
Genau.
Russisch, Englisch und dann Deutsch kommt's hinten raus, so.
Ja, Hauptsache Wodka. Ja, man, und wow, hey, heute ist Himmelfahrt, ne?
Ja, jetzt
Wir
dann,
rücken zur Himmelfahrt, man. Die ganzen Leute haben frei morgen und natürlich, die sind alle mal, die brauchen ihre Bollerwagen morgen, ne?
Morgen geht es mit den Männern los, ja.
Ja, das,
Ich bin ja nicht am Start. Bist
Aber-
du am Start irgendwo?
Hä?
Bist du am Start irgendwo? Männertagmäßig?
Ja, ich habe mal mit so ein paar palästinensische Freunde gesagt, dass wir würden uns zusammentreffen, aber wir bringen keine Bollerwagen, sondern einen Hisbollerwagen mit.
Ist Bollerwagen. Oh, Alex.
Naja, we're gonna get that thing loaded up and I'm gonna get loaded. Nee, ich muss mal morgen arbeiten. Wir haben eine Liveband morgen in Flower Power, so das ist gonna,
Am Männertag musst du arbeiten, das ist hart.
Ja.
Das ist halt echte Männer arbeiten. Ne?
ja, that's right, man. And, you know something, also, als ich in Goslar gewohnt habe, habe ich Männertag einmal gefeiert. Na, wir sind, ich habe mal vergessen, wie diese Berg heißt. Mensch, auf jeden Fall, das war schön, weil das ist, wo die ganze, die Hängleiter benutzen diese Berg zum Fliegen über Goslar und sowas. Und da haben wir mal so ein paar Kisten Bier mal mitgenommen. Wir haben dort mal natürlich mal in die Sonne gelegen. Wir haben mal Musik gemacht. Wir haben mal gequatscht. Wir haben mal natürlich, wir haben so eins am Schädel mal gehabt, beziehungsweise wir waren nicht betrunken, wo man hier durch die Gegend leiert und so weiter. Aber wir haben Spaß gehabt und das war cool, so ein paar Jungs zusammen, Musiker, wir haben uns dort gesessen, wir haben mal eine Kiste Bier gekillt und, und das war okay für mich, aber so richtig zu feiern und mich sinnlos besaufen, das muss ich nicht haben. Ich bin aus der Alter raus, glaube ich.
Ja, genauso geht's mir auch.
Ja.
Also bei mir ist auch so, ich freue mich einfach morgen ja, den Tag mit Familie zu verbringen und ganz cool und hab da überhaupt nicht das Bedürfnis, mich irgendwie auszuklicken.
Das beneide ich mal ein bisschen. Rammelsberg, ja genau, Deckel, dankeschön. Rammelsberg war das.
Rammelsberg?
Ja.
Ah, da witter ich doch auch schon wieder Kraftort.
Nee, hey, warte mal, hey.
Fruchtbarkeitskult auf dem Rammelsberg.
Hey, nachts bin ich mit meinem Mini dort hochgefahren und wir haben eine Mini gerammelt.
Wen habt ihr gerammelt?
Wir haben in den Mini gerammelt. Wer das war, sage ich aber jetzt nicht.
Ja, es ist halt, ich hab das erzählt, das ist ein alter Fruchtbarkeitskult. Das ist genauso wie bei der Maifeier, habe ich ja letzte Woche, glaube ich, erzählt. Letztens ist alles Fruchtbarkeit, ja. You make connections with these und dann zack.
Ja, genau, make connections with these.
Rammelsberg, da du dein erstes Date hast.
Und dann kommt die erste Rechnung für Alimony.
Ja. Aber das ist ja der großen Göttin egal. Ich mag ja alle Kinder. Weißt du, wer das nur zahlt, ist dann unser Bier. So.
Nee, das ist schon richtig. Aber nee, sehr, sehr geil. Das war sehr cool heute und auf jeden Fall ist wieder, sobald wir die Sendung haben, laden wir mal wieder hoch. Wir geben euch auch die ganze Verbindungen hier, auch für die kostenlose Buch von Ross Hamilton.
Das ist auch richtig cool. Ich habe da schon mal reingeschaut.
Das
geht wirklich problemlos. Ich habe es nicht ganz durchgelesen. Jetzt ist auch 140 Seiten oder sowas war das. Ja. Aber es sind auch Grafiken drin und so. Ist echt interessant. Ich habe es mal so angeguckt. Ja, stellt er frei zur Verfügung.
Auf jeden Fall alle diese Links, so wie Ancient America. Oder Ancient American von der Zeitung, das Zeitschrift, das würde ich mal alles dann hochposten unter die aktuelle Meldung, dass Ross Hamilton heute bei uns mal in der Sendung war. Und natürlich, da ist gleich der Verbindung zu ihm in Facebook, so falls dass ihr mal Interesse habt, mal um weiterhin mal sich zu informieren über Dinge, das er angeboten hat. Ja, auf jeden Fall, das findet bei uns in die Amok, Alex und Frank Stoner Show Facebook-Seite statt demnächst. Und ja, Frankie, man, 2 Minuten haben wir noch. Wir haben noch einen Titel an den Start und das ist von deiner Bag of Tricks. Ja, Little Barkley James Harvest und ist eigentlich eine passende Titel für zum Abschluss mal der Sendung heute. Child of the Universe.
Oh ja, das passt perfekt für was wir heute so hatten. Ne?
Ja, dann sind wir sind alle Children from the Universe.
Genau, die Kinder des Universums. Ja, Spirit Child.
Also von meiner Seite mal, ich wünsche euch mal weiterhin gute Vatertag, be safe, ne? Nicht hier irgendwie ihr lasst die Auto zu Hause, ja?
Nicht rammeln auf dem Rammelsberg. Ganz langsam.
Don't drink and drive. Das ist mal most important. Ich weiß, dass das wird mal sehr viel Alkohol morgen fließen.
Ja, aber das Schöne ist, die Leute fahren ja nicht. Weil die laufen ja. Das wird gewandert. Ja.
Entweder das oder die, wie sagt man, wenn man auf alle vier kriecht.
Kriechen, ja.
Kriechen. Laufen oder kriechen, ne? Das ist viel, viel sicherer. Auf jeden Fall von meiner Seite mehr eine schöne Restwoche und kommende Langwochenende. Sage ich mal, viel Spaß, be safe, and Frankie, your sides, man?
Ja, ich schließe mich dem nur an. Genießt den Feiertag morgen, genießt den Mai und nächste Woche sind wir wieder am Start für euch, 20 Uhr, Mittwoch, Amok, Alex and Frank's Stoner Show.
Und an montags nicht vergessen mal the Frank Stoner Vintage Club for all you classic rockheads, ne?
Right.
Also, auf jeden Fall, hau rein, letzten Titel jetzt am Start für euch mal, Barkley James Harvest, Child of the Universe und wir hören uns nächste Woche. Bis dahin.